Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Bob Brower Scientific Symposium, sponsored by the Owasco Watershed Lake Association. A couple of little things to mention. There are exits on either side of the stage. The restrooms are out in the lobby to the left. And also, we have a free raffle that as you signed in, you could fill it out and put it in a bucket that we have out there, and then perhaps win a gift. We love to be able to follow up with you. This year's theme is creating hope, and it captures the significance of taking action. Hope is a noun, meaning the result of working together. And today is really going to make that abundantly clear to you. I'd like to thank, let me see if I advance here, the Auburn Public Theater for this wonderful facility, and particularly for James Reichert, who is handling our technology back there. The American Water Association, that is actually offering work credits for the engineers who have applied to be here for this, and to the Brower family. I've had some intimate awareness of the Brower family, and that is a great honor and pleasure, I'll tell you. So, the symposium was chaired by Bob Brower and Rick Nelson, and it's now very ably chaired by Ann Robson, who has also been the chair of the Owasco Watershed Lake Association. And we want to thank each of our presenters, and especially the fact that they've agreed to provide their email in case we don't get to all the questions and answers, so that you could follow up. We want to thank Michelle Wunderlich, Senior Planner of the Cayuga County Public Health. She's here with examples of invasive species that you can check after our presentations. Those invasive species are the core roots of challenges that really jeopardize our water quality. We want to thank Dr. Effler and Jesse Lloyd for lending us their model watershed. It's out in the lobby. And Owasco Lake has a 208 square mile watershed. It's the biggest one of all the Finger Lakes. And also, nice thing, Owla sends volunteers into the science classes of all 7th graders and teaches them watershed awareness, which is very important because a lot of our children and adults don't realize that their drinking water is Owasco Lake. And they don't know that the 208 square miles of our watershed affects our water quality. And that's what we're all about. I want to thank Dr. Joya and his wife for baking pies for National Pie Day. We thought you'd like to do some math. The circumference of each pie, of Mrs. Joya's pie, is many, many times 3.1415926 times the radius of a zebra mussel. So, Michelle, if you want to check that out, Michelle Wunderlich is out there with her, zebras, maybe quagga mussels, and you could do some checking to see if any of them approaches the circumference of your pie. So, let's get started. We're starting with the most wonderful fact, and that is that the Watershed Management Council that we've all watched evolve and grow and be is so incredibly effective and wonderful to posture us for strength, addressing the issues we're facing at the lake. I'd like to invite Dr. Adam Effler and Watershed Inspector Jesse Lloyd. Come on up the stairs over here. I've got permission to mention that Dr. Effler holds a black belt in Taekwondo. So I thought you might want to be careful. Come on up.
Thank you, Gilda. I'd also like to thank Aula for welcoming us to this forum again this year. It's our pleasure to be here. What did one stream say to another? Let's meet around the bend. Where do fish keep their money? Anyone? In riverbanks. Why does water never laugh at jokes? It isn't a fan of dry humor. So there aren't many water jokes out there, but I figure I would do my best to come up with something there. So. Right, for this section of the forum, our three-part talk will review the watershed rules and regulations status, watershed inspection, programming and projects, and clean water plan implementation. Again, my name is Adam Effler. I'm the Executive Director of the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council. Here with me today is Jesse Lloyd, my colleague and lead watershed inspector for the Owasco Lake Watershed Inspection and Protection Division. Watershed protection targets prevention, which is considered the bottom-up approach. And nutrient reduction is a primary focus to manage what's called primary production. For example, the growth of cyanobacteria. One approach for targeting watershed protection and the reduction of nutrient loading to the lake is the implementation of watershed rules and regulations. New York State Public Health Law, sections 1100 through 1107, empower the Department of Health to protect public water supplies by establishing regulations, conducting inspections, and ordering improvements to prevent contamination. The screenshot on the left just shows the front page of section 104.1, the City of Auburn and Town of Owasco. These are the current Owasco Lake Watershed rules and regulations that were approved in 1984. These regulations are currently implemented for watershed protection, and a local initiative to update the watershed rules and regulations began in 2017. This slide shows the timeline of the Owasco Lake Watershed Rules and Regulations Update Project from 2017 through the present. From an environmental trigger in 2016 to a regulatory request made in December of 2020, the collaboration phase in 2022, state interpretation in 2023, legal action that begins in January 2024, rulemaking that was halted on July 22nd, 2024, a second lawsuit that was underway on November 22nd, 2024, court rulings made in 2025, a court order made in 2025, and the current status. The localities began the process of updating the Owasco Lake Watershed Rules and Regulations in 2017 after harmful algal blooms toxins were found in the drinking water supply. In December 2020, following a community consensus process set out in the New York State Department of Health's Environmental Health Manual, the Town of Owasco and the City of Auburn formally requested that the Department of Health update the watershed rules and regulations to strengthen measures to reduce nutrient pollution. Nearly 2 years later, a work group was formed in response to the submission of proposed revisions to the 1984 rules and regs to the Department of Health. The Watershed Rules and Regulations Work Group was a state-local partnership consisting of representatives from 5 New York State agencies, as well as members of a technical local work group representing the Owasco Lake Watershed, including members from the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council, the town of Owasco, the City of Auburn, and Cayuga County. During the state consensus process, the Department of Health indicated that it does not have the authority from the legislature to create agricultural nutrient management regulations for the Owasco Lake Watershed. Specifically, the Department of Health indicated that when the voluntary agricultural environmental management program was established, nutrient management on farms became the sole responsibility of the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. Recognizing the Department of Health's apparent error with interpreting New York State public health law, the City of Auburn, Town of Owasco, and Owasco Watershed Lake Association filed a lawsuit against the Department of Health in January 2024. The lawsuit, an Article 78 petition, sought to establish that the Department of Health has the authority to regulate nutrient management practices under updated Owasco Lake Watershed Rules and Regulations. And Article 78 challenges the actions of administrative agencies and other government bodies. The lawsuit contended that the laws cited do not firmly establish that the Department of Ag and Markets' role concerning nutrient management supersedes the Department of Health's authority to promulgate regulations for the protection of public health. Subsequent to the initial filing on July 22, 2024, the Department of Health Bureau of Water Supply Protection notified the City of Auburn and Town of Owasco that the department did not intend to move forward with any amendments to the watershed rules and regulations. According to their letter, following internal evaluation of the existing regulations, the department determined that amendments are not necessary to ensure potable water quality for the foreseeable future. The City of Auburn, the Town of Owasco, and Owla filed a second lawsuit on November 22, 2024, responding to the Department of Health's decision that new rules and regulations are not necessary to protect Owasco Lake drinking water, wherein the agency failed to provide data or information to support its decision to terminate the rulemaking process. Following the Department of Health's request for dismissal of the first Article 78 complaint brought by the Owasco Lake drinking water purveyors and Owla, the court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. The Department of Health's determination it lacked legal authority to promulgate watershed rules and regulations to control agricultural nutrient management is an error of law and was made arbitrarily and capriciously. Subsequently, the court ruled in favor of the water purveyors regarding the second case, challenging the Department of Health's July 2024 denial of their rulemaking request concerning updating Owasco Lake watershed rules and regulations. In response to New York State's abandonment of the years-long project to protect Owasco Lake, Judge Carrie Savona ordered the Department of Health to, quote, work collaboratively with the petitioners to draft updated regulations that address nutrient pollution caused by agricultural practices. Judge Savona framed the case through the lens of New York's constitutional environmental rights, explaining years of scientific studies indicate clearly that Owasco Lake is in crisis due to harmful algal blooms, and that a plan needs to be put in place to remedy the situation. Without such a plan, the constitutional right to clean water for those residents whose drinking water is sourced from Owasco will be violated. Under court order, the Department of Health is required to move forward with the process to update Owasco Lake watershed rules and regulations. The Department of Health has appealed the court's rulings. Now we will discuss how the existing watershed rules and regulations are used for watershed protection. I welcome Jesse Lloyd.
All right, great. Thanks for everybody for coming out. So my name is Jesse Lloyd. I'm the lead inspector of the Owasco Lake Watershed Inspection and Protection Division. Some of you know me. I've done quite a bit of work with Owla over these last couple of years. I've lived in the watershed for most of my life, and I became the lead watershed inspector in August of 2024. So the mission statement of the Owasco Lake Watershed Inspection and Protection Division is to make regular thorough inspections of Owasco Lake, its water courses, and its watershed to identify compliance with the rules and regulations set forth for the Owasco Lake Watershed and to provide educational outreach within the watershed community that supports environmental stewardship. Since I've been here for a couple years now, I just wanted to show you guys a couple of projects that I've been through from beginning to end. So this was a large parcel of land that was cleared up gradient of DEC recognized wetland. The owner graded out over 2 acres of land and disturbing the soil and didn't put any sediment and erosion controls in place. After speaking with him, he put in improperly installed several rolls of silt fence. After a rainstorm, there was obvious turbidity discharge to the water course down gradient that resulted in a violation of local and state regulations. The DEC was informed and threatened further action against the owner if adequate sediment and erosion controls were not put in place. Contractor put down a thick blanket of mulch and backed the silt fences with silt logs. These controls stabilized the soil and protected the water course from further sediment discharge. And that's some photos of the finished project. This site on Sucker Brook received a lot of attention. The owner pulled out a lot of trees along the bank, destabilizing it. Myself and several members of the DEC spoke with the owner and expressed the importance of getting the bank stabilized. If sediment was observed discharging into the brook, it would be a violation. The owner quickly put down a very thick blanket of mulch and seed, and this protected the brook from sediment discharge until the bank was stabilized. At this site, the initial sediment and erosion controls became inadequate as the job progressed, resulting in a sediment discharge to the ditch. I spoke with the contractor, and he said to give him a day or two, and he would have it fixed. He put down stone in the driveway and graded it so the runoff water from the entire site ran into 2 settling areas at the bottom of the site. These settling areas allowed sediment to settle out of the runoff before leaving the site. It was great to see the engineering controls that a motivated and experienced contractor could come up with. These are pictures of the finished project. Okay, so this project, we're updating the map of protected water courses associated with the 1984 Owasco Lake Watershed rules and regulations. Many of the rules and regulations have distances associated with them. The current map is the black and white map on the left. It lacks features, landmarks, making measurements very difficult. So we've been working with Bruce Keplinger of the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board to update and digitize the map. Bruce has been doing a great job. Now we can underlie the map with satellite imagery so we could precisely locate points of interest. When this new map's made official, we'll make an announcement and make it available to the public. So I was made aware of this site in September of 2024. This site's in Locke. It was within 80 feet of the Owasco Inlet. I was in contact with the DEC while they were planning on what they were going to do with the site. Sampling results came back that the oil was something similar to used cooking oil, which kind of made sense for this site. Since the material was not deemed hazardous by the DEC, they would not clean it up. Although not deemed hazardous, if 1,000 gallons of used cooking oil spilled into the Owasco Inlet, it'd be disastrous for the ecosystem, not to mention just a stain on the whole community. When ALA saw this, they were very interested in helping me out. The first obstacle was obtaining permission from the property owners to do the cleanup. Since the former property owner had been deceased for 7 years and the property had never been formally foreclosed on, establishing ownership was not straightforward. I spoke with the 2 relevant parties about the cleanup, and neither wanted to give me permission. They were in fear that giving permission would establish liability. So at a dead end, I spoke with Carl Weber with ALA and gave him the information and gave him a shot. Eventually, Carl was able to speak with both the parties and get us the permissions that we needed to do the cleanup. I got quotes from several environmental remediation companies, and Momentum Environmental out of Bath, New York came in with the best quote. ALA raised funds through donations from local businesses, and they were matched by the Joe Wasilewski Memorial Challenge. Remediation took place on September 25th, 2025. Momentum's final invoice was almost 20% lower than their initial quote, and they provided extra services like backfill and mulch. An article I wrote on the cleanup came out October 16th, 2025. It was on the cover of the Lake Life section of the Citizen newspaper. ALA also published an article in the Citizen that came out on November 16th. So we ended up getting some pretty good press for this one. Our 2025 annual report is printed and now available in the lobby. The report includes inspection summaries, programs, projects, useful facts, and contact info. We distribute these to municipalities in the watershed and other places like libraries. It's also featured digitally on our website. If you'd like a hard copy for yourself or your business, please let me know. This year I put in a lot of really cool pictures and nice backgrounds. I believe it's charting around number 6 on New York Times bestseller right now. So we're excited about that. I just want everybody to know that I'm available. If anybody has any water quality concerns, questions, I'm always free. Just contact me. I will get back to you. With that, I'm going to give it back to Adam.
Thank you, Jesse. You may recognize this slide. We're moving into the third section of our talk, third and last section. So we're talking about the watershed protection approach targeting prevention with nutrient reduction as a primary focus. And our second approach being clean water planning and implementation of recommended projects and programs. The Owasco Lake 9-element watershed plan for phosphorus reduction used a soil and water assessment tool, hydrologic model, where 5 sub-watersheds were evaluated for their lake impacts and recommendations. Based on the 9-element plan's soil and water assessment tool, agricultural land contributes proportionally more nutrients and suspended sediments per acre than any other land use in the watershed. The model predicted that approximately 90% of the phosphorus loads originate from the agricultural sector. The SWAT model recommended that a 30% reduction in phosphorus loading would result from 4 best management or BMP practices. The adoption of nutrient management planning for all farms, restrictions of manure and fertilizer application to the land, the expansion of winter, that is cover crops, and stream bank stabilization. If you look at the map figure on the left here, you'll see the sub-watersheds partitioned by color, whereby the sub-watersheds with the deeper orange color are considered higher priority with regards to nutrient loading, that is phosphorus loading. A recommended practice in the 9-element plan is supporting the Management Council's central role in lake and watershed management. On November 15th of 2022, the Management Council Board of Directors approved of the creation of the 9-element plan project coordination committee that prioritizes, coordinates, and facilitates projects and programs implementation based on the recommendations of the plan. This committee is robust with regards to partnerships and collaboration. All of these partnering agencies and organizations are critical for our work in moving projects forward. This figure on the left, although a little blurry here, this is the front page here of our progress report. It's a progress report that depicts the 2022 through 2025 implementation projects and programming. And I would like to thank Michelle Wunderlich, Principal Environmental Planner for the Keiko County Planning Department, for really spearheading this project for us. She has made the report available via the link. There's a QR code here to connect you with this report digitally, and there are also some flyers out in the lobby so that you can get more access to that report. So thank you, Michelle. I do want to review some of the salient features of the report here. The model indicated that advancing ag best management practices and planning is a primary objective with regards to recommendations in the plan. For this particular table, we're looking at increased participation in agricultural environmental management program participation. And in this instance, with regards to the number of plans, and in the first column, partitioned by sub-watershed, indication of the number of plans with previous conditions, current conditions in 2025, the 10-year goal for each sub-watershed, and the extent to which that goal has already been achieved. Now we can see that 10-year goal, which would be 2032, was achieved for the headwaters at the Owasco Inlet, but has yet to be achieved for these other sub-watersheds. So still there's some work to do with regards to the planning in those areas. Another way to look at the expansion of nutrient management planning has to do with the total acres that are underway with nutrient management planning. Again, this is partitioned by sub-watershed, previous conditions, current conditions, the 10-year goal, and the extent to which the plan has been, that 10-year goal has been met for these sub-watersheds. And in this instance, using acres as the criterion, you can see that that goal has been met for several of the sub-watersheds, but is yet to be met for Mill Creek and Owasco Lake. The expansion of cover crops is arguably one of the most advanced of the BMPs. In recent years. There's a lot of buy-in from the ag community with regards to cover crops and a lot of success with getting these crops on the ground in recent years. If you look at this table, again, partitioned by sub-watershed, you can see that the 9-year, or rather in this case, the 5-year goal has been met for all of the sub-watersheds with the exception of Hemlock Creek and the Owasco Inlet. So we're making great progress there with cover crops. Okay, another ag best management practice is the installation of soil and erosion control systems. This is a practice that can come out of the development of a nutrient management plan. This is considered hard infrastructure and allows for the settling of sediments and nutrients from farms. And we can see that with regards to the targets here for 5-year goal planning, that the Owasco Lake has met its goal by 2027, and the other sub-watersheds have yet to meet their goals. What's interesting with this particular project is this project can be funded by what's a new pot of funding that's available to the Eastern Finger Lakes Soil and Water Conservation districts through what's called the Eastern Finger Lakes Coalition, which funds sort of bondable or infrastructure types of projects. So hopefully we'll see more of these projects get on the ground in the future. Let's talk some about stream bank stabilization. The 2023 Sustain Our Great Lakes program funded about $500,000 for the Owasco Lake Watershed Critical Streams Restoration Project. This project targets Owasco Inlet stream bank stabilization sites between Booth Hill Road and Cat Path Road in the town of Locke. Landowners who reside along the targeted reaches have expressed concern about severe stream bank erosion in those areas, and 2026 implementation is planned. If you look at our map figure here on the right, this particular project is located down in the sub-watershed here along the inlet, number 3, which is considered an intermediate priority with regards to phosphorus loading to the lake. Stream corridor assessments are important projects that help us identify conditions for the various tributaries within the watershed and can lead to resulting projects for remediation. In the summer of 2023, the 9-element committee grant proposals were submitted in response to New York State grant program solicitations, and the following was granted. Funding to the City of Auburn for a non-point, non-agricultural planning grant for stream corridor assessments, whereby $75,000 were granted. In 2025, assessments of Sucker and Van Ness Brooks within the prioritized Owasco Lake Huck 12 subwatershed were made. So we'll learn more about the features of this project in a presentation to follow. Although septic systems were not considered a primary concern with regards to modeling for the 9-element plan, a means model was used to identify the extent to which, or estimate the extent to which, septic systems were discharging phosphorus. That stands for method for estimating the attenuation of nutrients in septic systems. And based on that model, less than 5% of the total phosphorus load to the lake came from septic systems. However, it's still important to identify the work of the Keywood County Department of Health with regards to their programming and their inspection cycle. You'll see that for their inspection cycle for septic systems, that those properties with septic systems closer to the lake have a more rigorous inspection cycle and were required to have inspections more frequently. I'd also like to touch on the New York State Septic System Replacement Program. The Keywood County Health Department encouraged residents to utilize the replacement program, and this program had been created to assist property owners who choose to pursue septic system replacements and upgrades by granting up to 50% or up to $10,000 of eligible cost per project. So there's still dollars available for this particular program if you know anyone who could benefit from this program. And you can see in this table here, 2022 through 2024 results, the number of failures for septic systems that were fixed in the watershed, the number of grant projects completed, and that refers to this septic system replacement program, and the number of routine inspections completed. And you see 0 there for 2023. That just has to do with where inspections fell at the county level. They were not conducted in the watershed that year. I just want to touch on road and ditch projects. These have been very active in recent years. Strong collaboration between committee partners. The Keywood County Soil and Water Conservation District spearheads implementation of these ditch projects, and in certain instances, including, for example, this Ensenora Road ditch stabilization project, they've worked very closely with AWLA to raise funds to get these projects on the ground. Now, while not a high priority recommendation of the 9-element plan, land preservation for the benefit of ecosystem services is nonetheless important. The Nature Conservancy protected 72 acres of forested wetlands in Venice in 2024. It was transferred to the Management Council in 2025. The newly protected land is home to a diverse forest. Extensive wetlands on the property function as a natural filter, mitigating runoff from neighboring properties before discharging to Owasco Lake. So this is a second preserve that is now stewarded by the Management Council. A high priority recommended practice in the 9-element plan is continued surveillance and treatment of the hemlock woolly adelgid, a tiny aphid-like insect that attacks North American hemlocks. And of course, this would fall under the umbrella of invasive species management. We'll learn more in a subsequent presentation about AWLA's efforts and grants management to protect hemlocks within the Owasco Lake Watershed. Also, an educational billboard and watercraft cleaning tools are intended to reduce the spread of aquatic invasive species in Owasco Lake. The Tributary Adoption and Identification Project is a project of the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council that was advanced in recent years, whereby new signage has been installed in the southern portion of the watershed. Here we can see Mill Creek. The signage includes a QR code that can link to the Inspection Division's website to learn more about the project and gain contact information for watershed inspectors. I'd also like to thank the Keywood County Highway Department for their assistance with the installation of these new signs. We need to talk some about 9-element plan implementation and tracking progress. Both quantitative and qualitative metrics will be used to track implementation of the recommended actions of the plan and the extent to which Owasco Lake supports its best uses. The primary metric draws upon the annual monitoring reports for Owasco Lake from the Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program, or CSLAP. Chlorophyll A is considered a response variable by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and a summer average chlorophyll A concentration at or below 4 micrograms per liter, as documented through CSLAP, is considered evidence of successful implementation of the plan. Secondary metrics include updating the soil and water assessment tool, that is the model, with best management practices implemented, and percent increases of BMPs advanced within the watershed. Now there's an asterisk here. Utilizing the extent of BMPs implemented as a measure of water quality improvement is deterministic, cannot only explain the plan performance with respect, and can only explain the plan performance with respect to model recommendations. BMP metrics cannot replace direct lake and watershed monitoring. So let's talk some about the actual monitoring activities that are underway. AULA's Owasco Lake Tributary Monitoring is funded by the New York State Finger Lakes Lake Ontario Watershed Protection Alliance, that is FLOPA, and Cayuga County, whereby volunteers from AULA, with support from Management Council staff, conduct sampling and deliver samples to Upstate Freshwater Institute, which is a certified lab. SUNY ESF collaborates to collect tributary flow data and analyze and interpret project data. For the CSLAP program, this is spearheaded by AULA volunteers at one Owasco Lake site per year, and this is partially funded by FLOPA. And for the New York State DEC's lake and tributary and HABs monitoring data, they can be found online. The Finger Lakes Institute at Hobart William Smith Colleges continues to deploy and operate a robotic water quality monitoring buoy on Owasco Lake. The data from the buoy, as well as other water quality data from Owasco Lake, are digitized for public access. And the buoy is funded by Cayuga County, and the data portal is funded by FLOPA grant funds. So how are we doing? What are those data showing? This table shows data from 2017 through 2024 for summer average chlorophyll A and summer average total phosphorus. We can see that the trend of chlorophyll A is such that those values in recent years have fallen below that 4 micrograms per liter threshold. For total phosphorus, the data represents what would be expected for an illegal mesotrophic water body, that is a nutrient-poor water body, right? So Owasco Lake is a glacial finger lake, actually is very low nutrients with regards to nutrient concentrations. And these have, over the course of the last handful of years, hovered around 10 micrograms per liter or so. So the question here is, we're still having harmful algal blooms. We're meeting our plan goals with regards to chlorophyll A, and phosphorus seems relatively steady. Why are we still having blooms? And the reality is that there's more monitoring and studying of this phenomenon that needs to be conducted. Recent studies have shown that these organisms may be sourcing their nutrient needs from the lake bottom, and that there are a variety of factors that act as drivers that impact the development and the occurrences of harmful algal blooms in the lake. This is the last slide. I would like to invite the audience to enjoy a hike on us. The Nature Conservancy transferred the 161-acre property, that's the Fillmore Nature Preserve property, in the town of Sempronius to the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council in 2023. The land includes diverse forests, approximately 40 acres of freshwater wetlands, and hiking trails that are open to the public. So we welcome you to come and enjoy those trails. And with that, I thank you. Jesse and I are happy to welcome any questions that you may have. Thanks. Currently, the status of litigation with the New York State Department of Health is that the Department of Health has appealed the judge's ruling, both rulings with regards to the advancement of the regulatory process and the extent to which nutrient management should be included as a provision within the rules and regs. Not that I'm aware of.
Can you repeat that second part, that second question? Is there, it wasn't in a mic.
So the member of the audience was curious about the timetable in terms of what to expect with regards to resolution of the appeal by the State Department of Health regarding the litigation on the rules and regulations. I would also, oh, go ahead, Julie.
It's on, right? Yep. I was wondering if your agency is monitoring farms that are using cover crops and then using Roundup to kill the cover crops in the spring before they start replanting instead of just turning them under. I'm concerned that there might be more herbicide use than there used to be with the cover crops.
That's a great question. Yeah, I understand that the usually the cover crops are killed back using herbicide treatments, and you know I believe it's sort of a complicated discussion, right? Because we value the importance of the cover crops. However, the producer needs some means to be able to prepare their field to then grow their cash crops or their silage. So I don't know what the best solution is there. I can tell you that with regards to the watershed rules and regulation statutes, there's really nothing we can do about it. However, this is one where education is important. I certainly welcome those who are experts in this to better respond to your question. There's through whether it be Cornell Cooperative Extension or leaders from the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, and of course for the watershed, primarily Cayuga County, they might be able to give you a better answer on that one.
Follow up on the Roundup, I believe that carries phosphorus as well. Are we able to keep track of those organic molecules?
Right. I don't know that there's a way to keep track of organic molecules associated with chemical treatments and the fertilizers themselves. So the way that those amendments are estimated is through the nutrient management planning process, whereby soil testing and soil health is used to determine the extent to which nutrient amendments, whether it be manure and or commercial fertilizers, are required. I would also like to, with regards to the 9-element plan coordination committee that has collaborated to pull together the progress report to show what we've been doing over the course of the last handful of years. I'd like to thank our county partners, including the Cayuga County Soil and Water Conservation District, as well as the Department of Health and Planning departments, whereby they ended up taking what was countywide spatial data formatted at the county level to make that data relative to the watershed with regards to a spatial format. So that took some work, and we appreciate them taking a look at that and pulling that together for us.
Thank you for your great work, by the way, both of you. It seems from your presentation that phosphorus contribution to the lakes, all of the lakes really, is the main factor, and that's an agricultural phenomenon. We certainly are not here to demonize farmers by any means. They perform a crucial role in our society. But is there any motivation or inducement maybe to to see what we can do to work with farmers, maybe to induce them, to encourage them, to build a team. Not only education, but is there maybe some financial inducements we could all work with together to see if they might work with us, with you, to do better best practices on things, maybe discover some alternatives to some of the fertilizers that are used, and or certainly the cover crop issue, et cetera. So I'm just wondering if there's if it seems like agricultural contributions, which is essentially, farmers, is there any way to see if we can join hands with them to see what we can do to accomplish our goals? Thank you.
So that's a great question. And my response is that we are working with producers. So if you look at the committee membership, those involved in collaborating to move progress forward with regards to the 9-element plan, we have representation from those organizations whose constituents are producers and farmers, right? The Soil and Water Conservation District, as well as Partners for Healthy Watersheds, which is sort of a consortium of some of the CAFOs that have some presence in the watershed. And in fact, there's a member on one of our committees. In fact, I believe he participates in both committees, who is a producer in the watershed. So he can come and provide technical advice in a committee setting to help inform us in terms of how to best keep on track and move progress forward with farmers.
There's been a bit of study in Skaneateles Lake on the effects of the change over the years in biota, because it, from everything to microscopic to fish species. Has anything been done, or are there any plans to study the contributions of the change in biota over the years to the uptake of phosphorus, in the system?
So that's an interesting question. So that sort of describes the trophic status of the lake with regards to primary production and then secondary production. Essentially, you have nutrients that are bioavailable and are consumed by microorganisms, phytoplankton and macrophytes, and then at a second level are then consumed by animals. And of course, they then uptake those nutrients as well. That's not really the nature of the work that we do. However, it is very important. And I would say, just for example, harmful algal blooms as a phenomenon is probably best described as an ecosystem shift, right? So these are organisms, and we're trying to determine how these organisms are successful in the landscape of ecosystem science. So it's a great question and worthwhile study.
Yeah, because it seems like the goals are being met as far as current, the contribution of phosphorus from sources outside of the lake, so agriculture included. If that's the case, then there's something else going on, and I guess further studies needed for that.
I would agree with you. Further study is needed. The reason that agriculture is a focus is because of the recommendations that came out of the model that was used to develop the plan. Models are imperfect, but in this case, when it comes to identifying sources of non-point source pollution in the watershed context, that's really what we have to use.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Here we go. Thank you, Adam and Jesse, everybody. It's funny. Those of us who've been around a while, we remember 50 years ago when a hurricane washed a tremendous amount of fertilizer into the lake and changed the ecosystem quite dramatically. And all of a sudden then we had weeds that were so thick, we actually have a harvester go out and cut the weeds because people couldn't get their boats through and you couldn't swim in anymore. And, it's never a one and done. The causes of all these things have evolved over decades. And it's an ever evolving situation. An invasive species comes along like the zebra mussel, and then it releases phosphorus up into the water column and feeds those algal blooms. So we're in the midst of a constant, forever need to be involved, to be analyzing, observing, and acting. And that's why we say the theme for today is creating hope, because hope is created through action. And I just love everything we've just heard because it's all about action. And now more action. Our second speaker is Seth. Would you want to come up here? And there you are. Oh, okay, good. Seth is the city engineer, and he is in charge of municipal infrastructure. I'm going to let you get right to it.
Okay.
If I don't like what he says, I'll be back.
All right.
There you go.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. I'm joined here this morning by a professional that the City of Auburn has been working with, Emily Cummings with EA Engineering. And Emily, because of Adam's kickoff here today, has a water joke for you.
I tried to get Seth to tell it, but he said I need to tell it. So what does a fish say when it hits its head on a concrete wall? Oh, damn.
Awesome. Yes. All right, so all you other speakers coming up here next, get your thinking caps on. My name is Seth Jensen. I'm the Director of Municipal Utilities with the City of Auburn. Thank you for showing up today. Thank you, Aula, for continuing to put on a great program each year as it relates to Owasco Lake, our Owasco. They charged me with a presentation to talk about the City of Auburn's goals and initiatives in protecting Owasco Lake. And I look at that through the city's lens here today, but on a personal note, my family, myself, we identify ourselves as people from the Finger Lakes. Both of my sons are swimmers, swimming in Owasco Lake water every day at the YMCA. It's very important to our community. But from a utility standpoint, obviously, the City of Auburn purveys water, just like the town of Owasco, from Owasco Lake. So the health of the lake is extremely important for 45,000 area-wide residents. Almost around half of Cuyahoga County gets their drinking water from Owasco Lake. So I spent about 4 hours the other day working on multiple slide presentations. I pulled together what I felt like should be our goals as the City of Auburn. And I had a beautiful slide presentation pulled together. And then I took all of those concepts and things that I thought were important, things that we should be focused on, and I put them into this thing called ChatGPT. And I said, hey, Chat, can you put together an image of these goals? And this is what it spit out. And I was like, oh my God. 30 seconds, 4 hours of my work, 30 seconds in one slide. So I don't have a lot of slides for you here today. I'm going to hand it over to Emily. And this basically encapsulates, I think, what we should be thinking about when it comes to protecting Owasco Lake and doing work within our watershed. The first three is what we're going to focus on a little bit later with Emily and what we've done with sub-watershed assessments and their nutrient reduction, Obviously, less nutrients coming or flowing into the lake means a healthy, less production and less harmful algal blooms and growth within the lake. Protecting our natural filters, preserving properties that are in good ecological standing, like our flats, other wetlands or forests within the Owasco Lake Watershed. Very important, something that we need to continue to focus on and work on as a community. Erosion and sediment control projects in streams along our ditches. And you saw some examples of that the Management Council, as well as the Soil and Water Conservation District, really spent an awful lot of time focused on each year within our watershed. So we need to continue to support those efforts as well. Modernizing our infrastructure. The City of Auburn takes that very serious. We're in the middle of a almost $100 million capital upgrade at our wastewater treatment plant right now. But we do also have some smaller communities within our watershed. 2 wastewater treatment plants, one in Groton and one in Moravia. And right now, Moravia is spending millions of dollars on their wastewater treatment plant. And it's incredible to see their investment in continuing to protect Owasco Lake and minimize their nutrient contribution to our watershed. So that's extremely important too, in my opinion. 5th is invasive species. Adam spoke on that a bit. There's multiple programs out there. We have our lake stewards. We've got our sign. Michelle does a ton of work with invasive species. Our neighbors, some of our lakes right around us are dealing with invasive species like hydrilla that can really take over an ecosystem in a hurry and change that ecosystem in the wrong direction. 6th, community stewardship. Events like this one, year over year, where we're informing the public and trying to just learn more and gather more information and understanding, getting into our schools, working with kids. Owla does a fantastic job with that. Adam mentioned the lake-friendly living program and just sticking yard signs out there so when you're driving around the watershed, you know that you're in the Owasco Lake Watershed and maybe think twice before polluting. And then finally, this one's a little bit more abstract, harder to kind of put your finger on, but climate resiliency. In my 10 years as Director for Municipal Utilities, we've seen a couple near 100-year storm events hit our watershed. And at the same time, we've seen 100-year droughts hit our watershed. And that's just in 10 years' time. So we are seeing huge swings in our climate year over year now, and just being climate smart, climate ready, investing in wetland creation, those natural filters that help mitigate large storm events when they occur. And if we do all of these things, and we are, Adam mentioned and hit points on just about every one of these in his presentation earlier, we should start to see measurable results like lower phosphorus contributions, less harmful algal blooms, an increase in our water quality, maybe more protected land. I believe we've protected almost 900 acres in the last 7 or 8 years. Continue on that stretch, and an overall healthier ecosystem. So those are kind of like the high arching goals that I thought were important. ChatGPT stole my thunder and pulled it all together into one visual reference for you all today. It's an incredible program, and a little bit disheartening to see all my work done in 30 seconds. And it incorporated into what I think is a kind of something that we need to just keep coming back to and say, are we doing these things within the watershed? And there's so many partners that the city supports, I personally support. And when it comes to watershed protection, Another thing that Adam mentioned, and I fully believe in, is that we need to fix our lake at the source, not in the lake itself. It's easy to do in-lake treatments, but you're not fixing the overall problem. And as long as I'm Director of Municipal Utilities, I'm going to continue to advocate and support the Owasco Lake Watershed Management Council, because that's what we need to do. We need to continue to support all of these initiatives and more, I'm sure. I didn't ask chat what I'm missing. I just asked it to take what I had, and I'm sure there's more that I didn't come up with here today. But these are the goals I think are most important. So I'm going to flip the switch a little bit here. We're going to turn the lights on, potentially. And those of you that are online, I think that you're able to potentially participate in this. I want to ask you guys a question. Who here lives in the Owasco Lake Watershed? All right, so we've got, keep your hands up because I'm a slow counter. I'm slow. I don't know, we'll say 20 people. All right, so we've got 20 folks here in person, plus or minus, that live in the Owasco Lake Watershed. Who doesn't know what the Owasco Lake Watershed is? All right, that's good. That's good. If you raised your hand, I don't know where I would have went with that. Poll question two: if you're one of those 20, and if you answered online, thank you as well. If you're one of those 20, who has a stream or a tributary that transects or goes by your property that you own? All right. Well, that's good. 7. All right. So keep that in mind, and thank you for participating. I'm going to turn it over to Emily here pretty soon to talk about one of our initiatives, one of the projects that we've been working on, and at the end of the presentation, we'll turn the lights back on back there and re-engage. So no sleeping. Also, I forgot to mention, those of you online who are getting professional development credit hours, you have to pay attention, and you have to participate in this poll, because that's how we know that you're not just making coffee, drinking, cooking breakfast, doing whatever, out for a run, and that you're actually learning something here today to get those credits. So, as I mentioned, the first 3 goals of nutrient reduction, some stream bank work potentially, and doing work to minimize erosion and capture nutrients was an initiative that the City of Auburn, through the guidance of the 9-element planning committee, helped us to develop. And we wrote a grant for the first time. It was made available to municipalities to do comprehensive stream corridor assessments. And we focused our project in the Owasco Lake sub-watershed. You saw a few slides ago from Adam, the watershed map with lots of different colors. The heat map, the Owasco Lake Huck 12 sub-watershed has the highest, per the model, had the highest phosphorus per acre contribution. Maybe not the most phosphorus coming into the lake, but the highest per acre. So for every dollar spent per acre in this sub-watershed, we should see the largest amount of phosphorus reduced, contributing to the lake. The state liked that idea enough to provide us with the grant funding. We went out to competitive procurement process, hired EA engineers as the most qualified firm to assist us with this. And we really focused this on Sucker Brook and Van Ness Brook. The whole sub-watershed obviously is comprised of lots of little intermittent streams along the east and west shoreline, but the largest contribution of flow certainly is coming from Sucker and Van Ness within this sub-watershed. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Emily and let her describe to you all a little bit about the process that we've been going through with them over the last year. So thank you.
Good morning. So as Seth mentioned, EA Engineering has been under contract with the City of Auburn and also working with other project partners in the watershed to complete this comprehensive stream corridor assessment of Sucker Brook and Vaness Brook. Under the grant awarded to the city, there's two main guiding documents of how those assessments are performed. One authored by New York State for the whole grant program. And then really one of the main guidance documents is out of the Susquehanna Coalition in the southern tier. They provide a framework for stream assessment. So EA has, as Seth mentioned, worked through this year to prepare those assessments. So what's included in that? It included initially a detailed desktop assessment. We wanted to establish baseline conditions based on our historical review of documents that already exist on the two streams and their watersheds. And then even just as simple as looking at Google Map aerial imagery, how land use has changed visually over time. We used our background data review with the Google imagery and with geographical information system sort of mathematical processing of some of that information to identify target reaches within each stream that we thought were best suited for an in-field assessment. So in-field measurements and observations. We identified those reaches and worked with the city and the Watershed and Protection Division to get access to these private properties where the reaches occurred. We went out and did about a week of field work, looking at a couple sites in Vaness Brook and then a couple other sites in Sucker Brook. So all in all, the desktop assessment and our field assessment, we coalesced that information into two separate reports for both streams. So in the field, what are we looking at? We were looking at stream channel, stream bank, and riparian zone measurements and observations. Channel width and depth of the stream channels were measured, and we did that to determine whether the dimensions of the channel as they exist are within expected ranges that are developed on regional geometry curves in our area of New York State. So variations in these ranges can indicate potential issues in the channel. So is there potential for enlargement of the channel increasing in size? Is there potential for channel incision? It's getting narrower and deeper. We use those measurements to make that determination. Then looking at the stream bank, are there indicators that there is potential for bank erosion? So we used a standard measurement of bank erosion hazard index, which looks at bank slope, vegetation, soil, bank angle, and stratification, root density, to basically rank low, medium, high of if a bank is likely to erode or if it is stable. And then in the riparian zone, is there an active buffer, established buffer present? What is it composed of? Does it have invasive species or adequate vegetative diversity? And then moving out even further, we look into the floodplain. So the floodplain assessments examine how well the stream maintains its connectivity with the upland and floodplain area outside of the immediate channel. And a key metric in that is the elevation of the floodplain relative to the stream channel's bankful stage. So if there is too much of an elevation difference, the stream will not be able to access its floodplain in high flow events. And if when it's lower and more connected with the bankful elevation and floodplain, you are able to get the lateral dispersion in high flow events. And then looking at upland areas, what is the land use? Are there existing impairments that can be noted? Are there existing obstructions that could impact overall stream health? So with all that data, we went back and then established some recommendations on certain sites that we looked at in the field, but also general recommendations that can be implemented across these watersheds. So these might seem very familiar if you're familiar with the 9E plan. These are a continuation of what was started in the 9E plan. So providing a more specific recommendation per sub-watershed and even per reach, and really developing conceptual project plans that can be utilized by project partners and you all to pursue further projects. So some of these recommendations, again, you might be familiar with, but riparian buffer enhancement, part of our desktop evaluation, we identified where there were positive buffer indicators, where there were already areas of 35-foot width or greater. We use 35 width as our kind of starting metric, where there are forested areas or where there are existing wetland areas, and mapped those areas. And then looked at both areas where there are a good buffer system already established and maybe some areas where there's a lacking buffer. So overall recommendation of just increasing that buffer width if possible, and also just increasing that diversity. So instead of low-lying herbaceous vegetation, considering planting additional riparian, shrub and tree species to really increase soil stability, but also provide shade and cover on the stream channel, which can help aquatic organisms. Bank stabilization, as we've talked about a little bit already today, that's a combination of both hard and soft engineering practices to match local conditions and to kind of buffer the near bank stresses that are caused during high flow events or even base flow events to prevent further soil loss. So it can look something like placing riprap, regrading, and even just vegetation can help stabilize these banks. And then a third recommendation is culvert repair and removal. This is aimed at addressing hydraulic bottlenecks that can overall reduce erosion and help restore natural stream connectivity. It involves repairing or resizing existing culverts. There may be instances where culverts are too small for the channel. So are they constricting flow? We would recommend expanding overall width to let higher flows pass. And then there's also a couple instances where there are culverts that appear to be no longer in use or needed. So we could look at removing those culverts. And then fourth, wetland creation. So we identified areas in both subwatersheds where existing conditions present opportunities for wetland creation, either on a larger scale or creating these little pocket wetlands. That would involve excavating an area and replanting with native wetland vegetation. The overall goal, is to improve water quality by helping slow water down, having the wetlands act as a nutrient sink, and allowing those plants and microbes a chance to uptake and transform some of the nutrients you're seeing in the watershed. Okay, a little more excavation involved, channel realignment. So this could be appropriate where there are historically straightened portions of the channel or overly sinuous. So areas where you have really sharp bends that are creating a lot of stresses on the outside bend of the channel, reconfiguring that channel alignment by excavating a new channel and abandoning the old channel just to soften those curves or to create some natural sinuosity again. We also observed that there are instances of head cuts in the stream channel. So basically the bottom of the channel is eroding over time. Currently, the ones we observed were stabilized by larger trees' root systems, but over time, those head cuts can propagate upstream. So basically it starts eroding and then the face keeps getting eaten away and it migrates upstream. And that can lead to a lot of soil and sediment mobilization long-term. So we would recommend installing grade control structures and infilling those head cuts with some larger stone just to dissipate some of the energy. And then lastly, this is more of a floodplain / riparian boundary recommendation of stormwater management, as some of the previous presenters have already mentioned. Interrupting or addressing some of the flow or overland flow of stormwater from agricultural or other land uses can help reduce overall sediment and nutrient inputs into the watershed. So this could take the form of, wet swale or dry swales, just to give the water or the stormwater a place to slow down, settle out, and deposit those sediments and nutrients before discharging into the channels. Not included in the stream assessment report, but also part of EA's scope with the City of Auburn, was to evaluate locations in both Van Ness and Sucker Brook where a stream gauge or flow measurement device could be installed. Where are there appropriate crossings that could be accessible? Where can these devices be installed with adequate access to power, whether hardline or solar power, and what are some of the pros and cons of these different measurement systems? Because as we've mentioned, implementation of these BMPs and these projects is great, but it's also really important to measure them and have quantifiable results to demonstrate your reductions. So this would provide an opportunity to have distinct flow measurements on those streams that we don't currently have flow measurement capabilities on. And so some of the alternatives we looked at were more simple stage flow measurements, and then a little bit more complex flow measurement systems that are capable of transmitting electronically and then can be managed by the city or another project partner outside of the USGS gauge system. Okay, next steps. Coming out of these stream assessments, where do we look or where do we go from here? Funding is obviously required to implement any of these projects, but also importantly is further engineering design and coordination. These are all conceptual ideas right now, and they need to be advanced further with topographic surveys, natural resource surveys, permitting with state and federal regulators. And I think also most importantly is property owner coordination and buy-in. Most of these streams run through private property, so it's incredibly important to have that engagement and interest with those property owners to have these types of projects completed on their property. So I will turn it back over to Seth, who has another question.
Nice job, Emily. Thank you. And as Emily mentioned, this is going to be kind of the hardest part of this project, right? Is all right. We've done the plan. Now we need to implement. The city is good at implementing projects, but they're within City of Auburn owned property. So for those of you who raised your hand the first and the second time, this is kind of the third question is, all right, we have this stream assessment with recommendations for improvement. Who would be willing to partner with an organization like the City of Auburn, the Management Council, Soil and Water Conservation District, perhaps? They do a lot of this type of work to do an enhancement on your property. Anyone? Oh, there's a forced hand. All right, I like that. It's not going to be easy, right? So what does that look like? Does that look like a permanent conservation easement? A sale of property? Because these practices, once they're installed, need to be monitored and kept up, and in some cases maintained. And that's going to be some of the harder things to work through as we come to a close with this project, is that engagement with the community. So I appreciate you guys' participation in this presentation and your time today. Are there any questions or insights into maybe help us with our next steps?
Timeline on the projects in Venice and Sucker?
So the report is in DEC's hands right now for final review. We have probably a more comprehensive presentation on the results that will show the properties that EA is recommending some of these alternatives on in the next month or so. So my hope is that this report will be finalized by spring. And then we'll likely work with the 9E Planning Committee, with the Management Council, and try to do some engagement with property owners over the next few months. I'm not sure what that timeline looks like, and it all depends on whether we have a willing property owner and what those next steps look like. It could be fast within the next year or so. It could take a couple of years, and I'm sure Doug Kearse with Soil and Water Conservation District can attest to having projects all ready to go, and then somebody backs out, and that whole project and planning effort stops for now and sits on the shelf. But I don't have a great answer for you on that, Bruce.
Follow up. Is this project just for the design and then you still have to find the actual implementation money?
Yes, this project is planning level only, very high level design. So once a project's identified, full scale 100% design, we have to go in permitting. So we all know that can take a year or two to get through just the permitting process with various agencies, depending on what that scope of work specifically looks like.
Yes, Seth, and in the 9E report,
Yep.
it had a list of the projects for Vanessa and Sucker Brook. Those figures, what do they include there? If you've got an area and it has a $300,000 amount on it, would that include like the new engineering process and work to be done on that particular section? Or is it more than that?
Yeah, can you answer? I don't completely understand.
Yeah, so I think you're referring to some of the tables that were in the 9E plan, right? Identifying these streams and sub-watersheds and the types of projects and relative cost. Is
Yes.
that what you're asking about? Yeah. So this is furthering that. So as we mentioned, there's those initial categories of what the recommendations are, bank stabilization or stormwater management. Those echo back to the 9E categories they mentioned. And then part of our deliverable in our report is identifying specific sites and then providing a more refined cost estimate. How much would a project, maybe combining multiple recommendations, bank stabilization, wetland creation, riparian buffer enhancement, maybe packaging all of them together, how much would that cost? And then we also provided a rough estimate of schedule based on the type of project. Does that answer your question?
Well,
If it doesn't, you can follow up.
Okay. I guess the only follow-up I would say is, so we're looking at a plan basically that if you had your wish list and we could go through and you put all of those things into Sucker Brook, that we would have a system that would be pretty workable for the next 40 years. Is that correct?
Yeah,
I mean,
that
that
I'll
you
let
would
Seth
certainly,
take
you would
that
certainly
question.
think it would be much.
He says yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Oh, one more question. Yeah, sorry.
So I was looking at your maps earlier for the watershed, and they look a lot different than Adam's map. I wondered if AI created your map or something.
No, just that first picture, just that first picture. So that map was just highlighting the Owasco Lake Huck 12 sub-watershed, just the portion of the total watershed. So I think there's 5 Huck 12s sub-watersheds within the Owasco Lake whole watershed. So that map was just highlighting what that sub-watershed of Owasco Lake Huck 12 is. And then the yellow portions were the even smaller sub-watersheds of Vanessa and Sucker Brook only.
Thank you.
Yep.
What a Huck, can you explain what the Huck 12 means?
Not
We're
really.
worried
I mean, Adam might be able to do a better job at that. It's just, well, maybe you can. Yeah, go ahead.
It's like a categorization of hydrological unit. So what is the watershed size? And so number equates to the size and scale of how they're categorized.
Yeah. So it's just a portion of the whole watershed. Yeah. Anything else? I know we're blowing time budgets here. I'm sorry. I saw your sign. I saw you do it. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Our next presentation is Rick Smith. Would you come on up, Rick? Are you up here already? Rick is the founder of Global Aquatic Research. In 2011, Rick received a PhD in chemical oceanography from Texas A&M, and he is able to talk with us about the chemistry of harmful algal blooms, and then also these foam things that are forming lately on the lake. So,
thank you so much for the introduction. My company, Global Aquatic Research, has been working on HABs and foam in the Finger Lakes for the last 7 years, and we've built up a body of work that I want to give an overview of today, and show you how these two phenomenon are linked through changes in lake chemistry. I'd just like to say, first off, it's an honor to be here in a room with so many people who are fighting for good water quality, and we want to be part of that fight as well. I want to really go over my collaborators real quick and just start off by thanking them. Dr. Stella Woodard, who is here, she's been a lead on all this research and a driver of it. Dr. Yushin Wang and her graduate student Tasneem at Binghamton University. We recently worked last year on a Water Resources Institute project that has some data from Owasco Lake that I'm going to be talking about. Doctors Ryan Pereira and Philippa Ricard. These are collaborators in Scotland at the Heriot-Watt University, and they work in places like the Amazon River in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So we've been really lucky to bring their expertise over to the Finger Lakes to help us out with some of these challenges. Doctors Nandini Kaur and Mark Knoll at SUNY Brockport, we've collaborated with them to build a Brockport Organic Geochemistry Lab where we have a lot of water quality analysis capabilities. Lindsay Ayers, Emily DeBolt, Cody Perez at Canandaigua Lake Watershed Association. We recently worked with them to roll out a Finger Lakes foam reporting tool that I'll be talking about. And Canandaigua Lake Watershed Association was an early funder of a lot of this research, so some of the overview is going to go over that work, but it's really important to know that this is applicable to HABs and foam across the Finger Lakes. We're seeing very common phenomena across the region. And Lindsay McMillan, who is now at the Finger Lakes Land Trust. So this is a screenshot of the New York HABs map in late 2023. So this really shows all the reports up to that point of the year. And what we can see is how widespread harmful algae blooms are. And particularly what we're dealing with are cyanobacterial harmful algae blooms, predominantly of the genus Microcystis. And what this map shows us is, Owasco Lake is obviously not alone. This is a problem at a really large spatial scale that all the lakes are dealing with. And we can also see how new this problem is. If you look at this inset from the DEC literature, in 2012, Honeoye had a suspected bloom. And by 2017, just 5 years later, all the lakes had a confirmed bloom or a confirmed bloom with high toxins. So this is something that's developing in real time very rapidly that we're trying to wrap our heads around. And like Adam mentioned, this is really an ecosystem shift. It's really important to note that these shoreline observations are not really always limited to just where the HAB was observed and reported. But these blooms can actually span across vast regions of the lakes. And this has been attributed to changing climate, warmer surface water temperatures. It's been attributed to invasive mussels. But really also what we're looking at is changing lake chemistry that's been the product of everything that we've done in the watershed up to this time. And that's not the only symptom that we see of a changing lake chemistry. This picture was sent to us by Lindsay McMillan in 2019, and this is where we really started working on these problems. I had never really quite seen anything like this in a freshwater system, a lake with otherwise really good water quality. The very large shoreline accumulation of this really white, almost shaving cream looking like foam. It's something that we might see like in a marine area like the North Sea after a really large phytoplankton bloom. So as somebody who works on complex natural organic matter mixtures and tries to tease out those sources, this was a very interesting problem to work on. And so as part of this early work on Canandaigua, we built a reporting tool so we could actually know when to show up and sample and start documenting this and see what this looked like and how we get to this stage. And we have since rolled out that reporting tool to all of the Finger Lakes. I'll be talking about that. And we've now documented this phenomenon on all the large Finger Lakes. So you can see, similar to HABs, this is a very widespread problem. So how does foam actually form on lakes? Well, lakes are a reservoir for chemicals that are produced from things growing in the lakes and growing outside of the lakes in the watershed, as well as pollution that washes into the lakes. And these mix together in varying degrees, and compounds that are not very water soluble or are surface active end up at the air-water interface. So that little thin layer that's less than a millimeter thick at the top of the water, we also call it the surface microlayer, or the SML. This is a very different chemistry than the rest of the lake. And when compounds accumulate in this SML and they reduce the surface tension of the water, and we entrain air through wind, waves, and currents, we can actually get a lot of bubbles to form that are very stable, and this is foam. So this graph on the left, I think, really sums up pretty well the difference in chemistry between typical lake water and foam that is formed from that top layer. This is a very advanced instrument that our collaborators in Scotland have. It's called liquid chromatography, organic carbon detection, organic nitrogen detection. There's probably only about 5 of these instruments in the world right now. And it's really cool because we can take a single water sample and get a full profile of the chemistry at one time. And what you can see with this lake water, and this was done in Canandaigua, this peak in the center here is humic substances. And so that's what really is the dominant component of lake water, which makes a lot of sense. Humic substances are produced in soils, they wash through streams into the lake, and they can also come from wastewater treatment plants. But if you look at the foam, its signature looks completely different. This large peak here is biopolymers. So what's a biopolymer? It's really a long-chain molecule that's produced from a living organism. And where do we think that's coming from? We've done a lot of other research. We have a report out there with more chemistry in it. And we found that this biopolymer is actually very polysaccharide rich, and a polysaccharide is a long chain of sugar. So where are these coming from? Well, microcystis, when they bloom, they form colonies, and this is a colony under a microscope. Each of these little brown circles is a cell, so this is a cluster of cells. And this translucent material that's surrounding them, that is what's called an exopolymeric substance. So as microcystis grow, they make and excrete these polysaccharide-rich biopolymers, and they use it to regulate their environment. So they coat themselves in this gel-like stuff. And when they're growing and when they die, this stuff gets released into the lake, and it can dramatically change the chemistry of the lake during these blooms. What we see to the right here is just the link between the chemistry and the physical change in the water that allows foaming. Is the amount of organic material in the water goes up. The surfactant activity goes up, which just means surface tension goes down. The likelihood of foam forming goes up. So what does this all mean together? It means that the foundation, the chemical foundation of foam, are these biopolymers that are linked to microcystis. But minor components may also be important. It could be about creating the right chemical cocktail. And that may be why some lakes that get HABs get a lot of foam and other lakes don't. So we really need to expand this study to more Finger Lakes to see these differences, because while most of the lakes we're looking at get foam, some of the lakes have different levels of it, as we've seen throughout our field seasons. So this is very interesting, because not only does how we change lake chemistry through what we do in the watershed create HABs, and they change lake chemistry and create foam, but foam can change the distribution of chemical compounds in lakes, because foam forms as streaks that can be miles throughout the middle of the lake, and it's scavenging compounds that are not very water soluble, and it's picking up particulates, and it blows to shorelines, typically in the prevailing wind direction, and it can persist for a couple of days, and it kind of dries and desiccates, and it can actually blow along soils, and people see it at the sidings of their homes and on trees in their yard. So we're really kind of interested in what's in this foam other than just this biological material, because studies from other lake systems, really polluted lakes, have shown that foam can scavenge and concentrate pollution at 10, hundreds, or even thousands times ambient levels. So if it's kind of concentrating pollution from the middle of the lake and bringing it to the same shorelines over and over, we really want to know about this. So the first chemical that we started looking at was microcystins, and this is the toxin that microcystis algae make. This is why they're such a threat, right? The Finger Lakes provide drinking water to upwards of 2 million people in the region, and this is a very potent liver toxin. So this was the first thing we looked at. If the harmful algae blooms are producing material that builds the foam, then we should also look for their toxin. So we always compare foam to lake water because we want to see those differences. These blue bars are our lake water samples, and the yellow bars are our foam samples. And what we can see is microcystins are almost always higher in foam. The relationship is kind of messy. Sometimes that difference is not very dramatic, and other times it is. Here we had a sample in 2019 where the water was undetectable for microcystins, but the foam had upwards of 16 parts per billion, which would be, enough to have a beach closed. So what's going on here is that microcystins are very water soluble, so they don't chemically prefer that surface microlayer in getting into the foam, but the foam just picks up everything that it moves across, and one of those is algal cells. So these microcystins are in intact algal cells. So the take-home message here is you could have water next to you that's relatively clean for microcystins, but the foam, that doesn't necessarily mean the foam nearby doesn't have it. It could have picked it up from somewhere else and transported it. But that's the story with microcystins. There are chemicals out there that really do prefer that surface microlayer. And one of these are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. You may also know these as forever chemicals because they never break down in the environment. And these are long chains of carbon bonded to fluorine. And one side of the molecule loves water and the other side repels it. So they love orienting themselves right at that air-water interface, and we actually expect to see a real chemical enrichment in that surface layer and in foam. So we started moving and measuring these. We got funding in 2023 from Freshwater Future, and we took 3 foam samples in Canandaigua Lake. They were all either shoreline or near the shore, but each of them looked a little bit different. This was a thin surface film. This one kind of dried and created this mud crack-like looking structure. And then the other were streaks that we got off the city pier. And we compared a lake water sample to it. So in Canandaigua Lake, the lake water had pretty low levels, 5.4 parts per trillion. And the foam was closer to 400 parts per trillion. It was really interesting because all these different foam samples were similarly enriched. So we see about a 70 times enrichment from lake water to the water that makes up foam. And even more interestingly, only certain PFAS are actually, so these are the totals, and these are actually the 30 compounds we measured. In certain compounds, there's maximum contaminant levels for things like PFOS, only individual compounds. This is one that's really a concern, and it's been phased out. And if we measured the lake water, we didn't see it. But in the foam, it was actually one of the dominant compounds. And in this sample, it was up to 140 parts per trillion. So what this really tells us is that we need to expand this research to more Finger Lakes. And when we're looking for pollution in lakes, we really need to understand the chemistry of those compounds to know where to look for them. How do they end up? Do they transform into other compounds? Do they stay as they are? So we got funding over the last year from the Water Resources Institute, the DEC, and Cornell, and we teamed up with Binghamton University to do more PFAS measurements and collaborated with Canandaigua Lake to roll out this foam reporting tool to all 11 Finger Lakes. So that's what we did last year. And now you can go to our website, globalaquaticresearch.com. We now have a dedicated Finger Lakes page, and we have a lot of resources and links to different things. And one of the things right at the top is our Finger Lakes foam survey. So anybody can report foam when they see it through our website. We have a browser and an app version. If you're using it for the first time, I suggest you click on the browser version, and there's directions at the top. And then if you're going to use it more frequently, you can download the app. So we use this for our field campaign. So one, we're trying to really document this phenomenon across the Finger Lakes. And two, we use it to make sure that we get out to the lakes at the right time because we're trailering our boat all over the place and we want to make sure we're successful on our field campaign. So the engagement that we've had with this tool in Owasco Lake has been absolutely wonderful. Here is the reporting tool results from the time we rolled it out last summer to when I downloaded the data last month. And what we can see here, so Owasco Lake is in this light green, yellowish color right here. And we can see all the Owasco Lake reports. We started in August. We had a lot in September, and then they kind of trailed off towards December. So this seasonality, we had reports from 6 different lakes. This seasonality of kind of maximum foam in September, trailing off towards, the late fall and the winter, is exactly the seasonality of blue-green algae blooms, which microcystis is, we commonly call them blue-green algae, even though they're not technically an algae. But so not only do we see this chemical link between HABs and foam, but they actually also have the same seasonality. Typically, if we're not seeing any foam on a lake, once we get the first big bloom, we'll often get a lot of foam about 2 weeks later. So this is kind of the fun part of these reports, is that we get dates, GPS coordinates, we get photos, and we get a lot of other information so that we can start to look at to understand something about these lakes. And so the fun part is kind of going through the photos and actually seeing what's out there. So it allows us to keep eyes on the lake, which is absolutely wonderful. Here's all the foam reports that we've gotten. Our first one was in August, and then I believe our last one was in December. And so we can start to look at some of these pictures. So here's one sent to us by Phil Joya. We can see that we often get shoreline accumulations of foam on the northern end of the lake in Emerson Park. On the northeast end, this was sent to us by Gene Canizzo, a very active volunteer who's been helpful in allowing us to sample. This is a very dramatic kind of foam streak. You can see how many properties it impacts, and it's just not really something that people want to see on their lakeshore when they wake up in the morning. And we've tracked these for miles along the lakeshore before in different lakes. So these can be pretty substantial events. Daniel Kuhn sent us this in September, and what you can see is this big foam patch kind of drifting in. So it's really interesting when you get the picture of how these mid-lake patches and streaks are kind of connecting with the shoreline. At the southern end, Adam and Jesse have been wonderful reporting foam and helping us to get out there to sample. You see all these streaks out from the southern end, and that's typically how the foam first appears. And then those streaks have very stable foam, and those kind of collect together and then blow along the shore. So what we're seeing is that Owasco Lake does look like the other lakes that we're looking at in terms of foam. So we expect these processes to be very comparable across systems. And as you can see, it kind of impacts all regions of the lake. We want to continue to collect this data for years, because then we can actually look at the shoreline frequency of where foam mostly impacts the lake, and then we can start to think about things like soil testing. So here's our field campaign as part of that project. So we went to 4 lakes: Owasco, Skinny Atlas, Seneca, and Keuka. And similar to our Canandaigua study, we measured lake water and foam, but we also added surface microlayer measurements. So this is how we do that. This is called a Garrett screen, and it basically is a stainless steel mesh that's on a stainless steel frame. And we just touch the very surface of the water with it. And it just picks up that surface layer, and then we turn it and we can drain that sample into a bottle. And to get enough material, we probably have to dip it about 50 times. So we're out there between sampling foam and the surface microlayer. It probably takes about 4 to 6 hours to collect enough material for all our analyses. And so we're out there chasing these foam patches around. And let's look at some of these results. In this map that I showed of the foam reports, this one that's in the middle of the lake was ours from the day we were out there sampling. So we showed up the morning of September 16th, and we found this very big foam patch off of Burtis Point. This extended for quite a distance in either direction of this photograph. Here you can see our foam scoop that we use to basically scoop up the foam, but allow the lake water to drain so we get a pure foam signal. And here are the total PFAS results. So we used a new PFAS method, which measures 40 compounds. And so we summed them up to get total PFAS measurements. These are in parts per trillion. And let's look at the water first. So Owasco came in at 5.3 parts per trillion average total PFAS in the water, and that's pretty good. Canandaigua was 5.4, Skinny Atlas 5.5, so that's really on the lower end. That's very positive. Keuka was slightly higher. Seneca was 25, but Seneca has a known source, the Army Depot and the watershed. So when it comes to lake water, it's really about, do you have a major source of PFAS in the watershed or not? When we get up to the surface microlayer, Owasco was about, what we see is a lot of variability, and that has to do with how calm the water is, how well the surface microlayer sets up, but we got 2.1 times higher total PFAS in the very surface of the water than underlying lake water in Owasco. So this is called an enrichment factor. So we take the concentration in this type of water sample or in the foam, and we divide it by the concentration in lake water. So what that says is we get 2 times higher in the surface microlayer. When we go to the foam, we got 19 times higher PFAS in the water that makes up the foam, or 101 parts per trillion. So yeah, it's higher. But as you can see, it was actually the lowest of all 4 samples, so even lower than Skinny Atlas. I will say that, so this is all what I would consider to be good news. But there's some considerations that we have to take into account. If we look at Seneca, the value was really high, over 2,000 parts per trillion, but that was a shoreline sample. We had issues finding a mid-lake foam sample in Seneca. We had to go there several times, and we ended up taking a shoreline sample. Now, they have a known source, and they have higher concentrations in the water. But our Canandaigua Lake results, Canandaigua has almost identical lake water concentrations to Owasco, and their foam samples were 400 parts per trillion. So that means that this mid-lake sample is probably a best case scenario. And as this stuff gets transported to the shore, it can pick up a lot more compounds. So there's still a lot more work to do. When we were done sampling that foam patch, this is what it looked like. And what we can see is that the foam started to dissipate and we had a harmful algae bloom set up underneath it. So what we're seeing now is that foam can actually recycle nutrients and offer a pulse of nutrients that may set up the next hab. So everything comes full circle. We change lake chemistry, we get habs, habs create foam, foam in turn can recycle nutrients and promote harmful algae blooms. So this brings me back to the million-dollar question, which is the question we're all trying to answer, which is, why are harmful algae blooms in the Finger Lakes so challenging to mitigate, especially in low nutrient lakes? We wrote an article about this in the Finger Lakes Times for Chris Kenyon's outdoors section. It's on our website. I encourage everyone to read it where you can go into more detail. But generally, the idea is this. Phosphorus is considered the limiting nutrient in freshwater systems. So more phosphorus, more algae, less phosphorus, less algae. But microcystis, it turns out, don't necessarily always care about that. They actually have a lot of strategies to grow when nutrients are very low. This was a table we made from a proposal that we wrote trying to compare low nutrient regions of the Great Lakes to low nutrient Finger Lakes. So on the y-axis is total phosphorus, and these are the ranges in different Great Lakes of total phosphorus, and here are the Great Lakes water quality agreement targets. The Finger Lakes are already within those ranges, and we're dealing with records amounts of HABs in the last few years. So it really means, you know, they might not get the results that they expect. And these are, you know, there's a lot of money and time and resources that goes into reducing these. Let's look at just the Finger Lakes. So Owasco is actually part of that proposal. And we can see Owasco's up here. It looks like from Adam's data that Owasco is actually lower now and probably closer to around here, closer to Canandaigua. But the point is that these are all relatively low nutrient lakes, and even Skinny Atlas, which is around 5 parts per billion total phosphorus, is still getting record amounts of blooms. So what does that mean? It does not mean that these efforts are in vain. Lowering phosphorus is absolutely critical. If we had higher levels of phosphorus, we'd be dealing with different algae bloom problems, possibly low dissolved oxygen, fish kills, all those sorts of things. What it means is that if we can't control the climate, if we can't control invasive mussels, if nutrients from the watershed are the only thing that we can control, we have to do it very well. And we need to think beyond total phosphorus and think about nutrient profiles. not only phosphorus, but nitrogen is really important. Okay, so that kind of goes past this, phosphorus is a limiting nutrient. Microcystis have very high nitrogen requirements because it's in the toxins that they make. We also have inorganic and organic forms of nutrients, and they're utilized by good and bad algae very differently. And then we have dissolved in particulate forms. So just that right there creates many different classes of nutrients that affect the lake differently. And if you take each one of these boxes, they open up more into many, many different compounds, especially when we get into more complex organic molecules that microcystis are very good at using. So the take-home message from this is that when the overall level of nutrients are very low, what is there matters a lot. And we can see that some of these more complex forms, like glyphosate, does have nitrogen and phosphorus in it. Urea, an organic nitrogen molecule. And you can just see how dramatic the rise in the use of these chemicals has been across the globe pretty much. But these are just two examples. There are many more molecules, and we should really be thinking about these profiles. So what can we do? What's the action that we can take knowing this? So let's think about foam first. We need to know why some lakes get foam and why some don't, even if they're all getting HABs. And then how can we respond to the foam? So we need to take the work that we've done in Canandaigua on the composition of foam and expand it across the Finger Lakes and pair it with this reporting tool. We need to look for more contaminant types. In the literature, you can see foam and other systems concentrate things like heavy metals and PCBs. We don't really have any data on that yet in the Finger Lakes. Do we need to test soil where foam washes up? And then what can we actually do about it? Should we be out there cleaning up foam? Maybe cleaning it up in target areas or parks where people are more likely to come into contact with it? And how do we better manage and mitigate HABs? So taking this expanded view of nutrients and thinking about when nutrients are really low, what is there? And looking at nutrient profiles coming off different tributaries that have different watershed types, agriculture, urban, forested, and actually looking at pretty high resolution as we get pulses of freshwater delivering these nutrients and watching as those nutrient concentrations decrease as they're being utilized and how that changes phytoplankton community compositions. This can be really hard through just mixed mid-lake sampling, because if algae really likes something, it's not going to be out there. You're not going to find it. So you need to look at these pulses of nutrients, whether they're coming from sediments, whether they're coming from rivers, or whether they're coming from foam. And we can really pair these kind of studies with improvements that are going on in the watershed. So we can collect data before, we can collect data after. If you have a really big, say, riparian zone project, or you're changing flow paths so you can absorb nutrients into the land, if you're just looking out at mixed concentrations of phosphorus in the middle of the lake, you might not see an improvement. But if we're looking at nutrient profiles and phytoplankton composition, where that stream is actually entering the lake, we might see real differences that we can then use to raise more funds and do more projects and really show how our projects are affecting the lake positively. And finally, there is a lot of data out there across all the different lakes. When I see the Finger Lakes, I look at them as 11 lakes that are all slightly different in different ways. They share a lot of similarities. These are actually natural systems where we can perform replicate experiments and really compare data across lakes to say, hey, does watershed to lake area really matter? Residence time, nutrient loads, things like that. So just mining the existing data that we have and doing more advanced statistical analysis on it. So I'm not quite sure where I am with time. My guess is I'm probably over. So just please consider us a resource and a partner to get some of these things done. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Great presentation. It seems like if you could figure out a way to skim the foam off the surface of the lakes, you could really remove a lot of pollutants that are out there. is there a tested, workable, practical way to do that? And if so, what would you do with the foam when you had skimmed it off the lakes? Thank you.
That's a great question. And those are all the things that we're thinking about in looking into. So not only pollutants, but also the nutrients in the foam. We know that foam can have over 100 times more ammonia than the lake water right next to it, which is the most bioavailable form of nitrogen. We just got some phosphorus results that show that phosphorus can also be higher in foam. So not only can we remove nutrient or pollutants, but potentially also nutrients. So the questions are, what does that mean from a mass balance standpoint? So what volume of foam would we need to collect to actually reduce like mixed lake concentrations? And so that's some more work that we need to do. And so yeah, do we collect it and remove it? And what are the logistical costs associated with that? Where do we dispose of it? Do we need to treat it before we dispose of it? Versus, maybe the solution could be, we say, hey, look, you couldn't collect enough of it to actually reduce PFAS concentrations in the lake, but it is concentrating along soils that are downwind. So maybe we just want to look at dissipating it before it reaches those soils, or so it can wash back into the lake. So we're thinking about some natural enzymes that can break down these polysaccharides, and yeah, so that's kind of the next phase of this research. So that's exactly what we're thinking about right now. And I think really working with municipal and lake association partners is going to be necessary to do that. It's going to have to be a pretty big effort.
Hi. I'm really scared when you talk about PFAS. We've been talking about PFAS in our Rotary Club for 4 or 5 years, and because there was an article in our magazine that said the PFAS were created because they needed something to contain the uranium when they were making the nuclear bombs. So after the war, it went into a cooking product called Teflon. And now, just couple weeks ago, there was a big article in the paper. They're still putting PFAS into carpets. It's in popcorn bags because it contains the moisture. It's in clothing the firemen wear. And it's a forever chemical. Once we ingest it, it's there. And it's been proven to cause disease like cancer. So I'm just worried that PFAS, which are not organic, they're inorganic. Would you?
They're not really inorganic. They have a carbon backbone, but they don't have any hydrogen. So they're kind of, in a way, they're more similar to organic molecules, but I don't know if they could be necessarily neatly binned into either. Usually organic molecules would also have hydrogen. But they're more close to an organic molecule than an inorganic. Is that right, Stowe? Do they define them clearly in those terms? Yeah.
Right. So they're not nutrient runoff. How do they get in our water?
Yeah. That's right. They don't. So they get in our water because they come from the watershed. And there could be some levels of atmospheric deposition, but mostly they're coming in via rivers. And it has to do with industry in the watershed. Is there industry that's using them in their processes? Or, people making consumer products in the watershed that use these chemicals? And also firefighting. So firefighting foam has classically had a lot of PFAS in it. So oftentimes airports, because they'll store the stuff at airports and they use it in firefighting training exercises and also putting out fires. When they use this foam, if you have a big fire somewhere in the watershed and they're spraying foam all over that fire to put it out, that stuff's going to wash into the lake. And we've unfortunately very poorly have regulated since World War II the use and in the remediation of PFAS. And it's really sad that we learn so much about how harmful these compounds are in an environment after we've used them for several decades. Clearly, we should seek to understand this stuff before we just kind of release it all out there. So, that's something that is a challenge. And did that answer all your questions about the PFAS? I would just like to say, too, that, with this foam data, it's not expected, this shouldn't be necessarily, the purpose of this is not to be alarming. These are parts per trillion concentrations. So what does 5.3 parts per trillion total PFAS mean? Well, the maximum contaminant loads for PFOS and PFOA, which are just two individual compounds, are, 10 from the state parts per trillion, and in 4 is the EPA. So, and that's in drinking water that you're going to be exposed to a lot. Obviously, we're getting drinking water from these lakes. Foam has kind of so it's a lot higher in foam, but the way we interact with foam is a lot different than how we interact with lake water or drinking water. I'd say the main purpose of looking at this stuff is because if people are producing PFAS and it's ending up in the lake and we're not looking for it in the places that it's ending up, then there's really no reason for them to stop producing it, right? So it's part of the start of pushing back against this is to show how it's impacting the lake and where it's impacting the lake.
Rick, thank you for your excellent presentation there. I understand that PFAS have relatively low detection limits. I'm curious about what sorts of challenges you run into when sampling foam for PFAS and some of the differences in the methodologies for measuring concentrations.
That's a great question, Adam, and thank you for asking that. That's something I'm certainly happy to talk about. It is something that when we moved into the world of measuring PFAS, it's not just, it really kind of affects our whole lives. We avoid this stuff as much as we can, especially during the field season. So we have to think about everywhere that it might be, how it might be on us, on our boat, in our car where we're transporting stuff. So there are actual lifestyle changes that we make to try to make sure that we're not contaminating our sampling equipment and everything else involved in doing this. We have special ways that we clean our sampling equipment, special protocols, and we clean them with those protocols after every time that we go out there. We also measure blanks. So we do a field blank, which is where and we also do equipment blanks. So the field blank is just basically taking some ultra pure water out there with you, pouring it into a sampling container, and then analyzing that. But the field blank, that water actually gets poured over our sampling equipment. And so far, we've been really lucky that our stuff has been squeaky clean. If you look at this one in Canandaigua right here, you can see our field blank was 0.34, which is basically barely detectable. And those are the kind of things we need to monitor. If you weren't doing that stuff, it's so easy to contaminate your samples at these levels. Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you looked at brighteners in the foam?
Have we looked at what?
Brighteners.
Brighteners?
Yeah.
What type of compounds are these?
They're these. They're in the laundry, and so they can be used to determine septic leaks. And I'm wondering if the foam has an enrichment of the brighteners that we see we see the brighteners in the lakes when we look at septic systems. But I'm wondering if the foam might have those brighteners to indicate maybe that those PFAS actually are coming from septic.
It definitely may. We haven't looked at that yet, and that's some more of this composition analysis that we need to do. So we're really thinking about, once again, what minor components are necessary to create that right chemical cocktail in the foam, and that could be a part of it. And I should point out too that PFAS actually creates foam itself. Like what they use to fight fires with is like an aquatic film forming foam. And so, they're a minor component that can stabilize the foam. Those could potentially be a minor component that can stabilize the foam. We do think there could be some linkages to how wastewater is treated and surfactants that enter the lake, but that is still a whole body of work that we need to do on this, for sure.
Thank you for this research. It's very illuminating. I hope that there are engagements going on as well with wastewater treatment purveyors. At least we have a contained environment, and being able to share this information and provide the opportunity to remove PFAS during the wastewater treatment process so that we can ensure that we're redistributing treated wastewater back to the lake, where we've exercised every opportunity to remove PFAS from the wastewater.
Yeah, absolutely. They use granular activated carbon, and of course, the thing is, once you remove the PFAS like that, then you need to dispose of it. And, there aren't many destructive methods for PFAS. That's what people are looking into. How can we destroy the PFAS molecules as opposed to just concentrating them onto some sort of resin or through some sort of filtration? And then we have a concentrated PFAS resin or a concentrated PFAS slurry that we then need to dispose of. So I think integrating the destructive technologies are probably a lot more difficult. They're really being done at laboratory scale right now. Stainless steel ball milling is one that they've shown that temperature and that physical breakdown actually helps with them. There's a lot of other high temperature and catalytic stuff that people are looking into. But I think that's really where we need to go. It seems pretty plausible that these concentrations that we're measuring in the water right now are going to continue to increase, for sure. So. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My goodness, how wonderful. It's comforting to be informed at all, right? So now our last presenter for this morning is Matt Del Buono. He is an extension aide with Cornell University's New York State Hemlock Initiative. And this is another major challenge we face. And, it reminds me, too, that Aula has, over the past 30 years, done a lot of partnering and sharing funding, half state, half Aula, which represents the citizens, local citizen support. It's easier to get funding, federal funding, and so forth, when the actual people living in the community are also working. So we've seen when Seth was talking about the stream bank reinforcement or ditch remediation, that funding is out there, and that is something we are old hands, I would say, many years of many partnerships to get that work done. So may I invite Matt up, and hi, and Carl Weber is coming up too. Here we go. I'll let you just
Thank you so
step
much.
right in.
And the clicker out here. Thank you. I should ask, I missed the first minute of Rick coming on, and I wanted to ask, did you start with a joke or? Okay. No, I'm glad. I'm off the hook then. I didn't want to be the only one. So I just wanted to clarify. And I see I gotta jump forward a bit here to my slides. Okay. Oh, there we are. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. My name is Matt Del Buono, and I'm an extension aide with the New York State Hemlock Initiative. And I'm also joined here by Carl Weber, who will be out in just a second. So I'll start just by giving a quick lay of the land of how we'll spend the next 30 minutes or so. I want to kick things off with just a little bit of background information about hemlock woolly adelgid, which is an invasive pest that's threatening hemlock trees in this area. So just kind of some foundation and background information. And then I want to invite Carl on stage to share details about the amazing activities and resources that they've done for this area to conserve hemlock trees. And then I'll be back to talk more about some of the big picture management strategies that we're employing, not just here in the watershed, but across New York State. So all under the umbrella of integrated pest management. And I want to wrap things up with, I know the theme here is hope, and so some exciting things that we're seeing in our work and the evolution of predator rearing, as well as some things that private landowners and land managers can do coming away from this conversation today. So with all that being said, let's jump right in. For anyone who's not familiar with the New York State Hemlock Initiative, we are based out of Cornell University, and we are a group of researchers and extension professionals that research forest health issues, and predominantly we are looking at the invasive pest hemlock woolly adelgid, and we are able to accomplish our work through our many talented partners. So we work with government agencies, we work with nonprofits, lake associations, and also we rely heavily on citizen science data. So that's really critical to the work that we do as well. Before I go any further, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge our team. I just pulled some images here that show, folks in the field doing work. A lot of work goes into presenting the data and activities that I'll be running through here today. And so I just want to acknowledge our group, particularly the gentleman in the orange jacket in the top row there. That's Nicholas Diechler. He's a forest health and ecology researcher and helped me pull together some of our biological control slides that I'll be sharing as well. So I did want to acknowledge him specifically. Okay, so with all that background information, I just want to start off kind of by answering the why question. There are a lot of forest health issues out there, all kinds of pests and pathogens that we're dealing with. So what makes hemlocks so important and special and HWA as well? And the first thing I just want to say is that they are a foundation species. They are not just a component of an ecosystem. They are more of an architect of the ecosystem in which they reside. So a couple of things that I want to call out that make them very important. One is that they fill a very specific niche in the environment. They have a tendency to grow and thrive in places where other trees may not. So we find them on slopes in many cases, and they are a very shade tolerant tree as well. So very commonly associated with stream banks and with the lake shores as well, of course. Related to that, they have a very unique shallow root system, which is critical for filtration and for keeping soil in place and preventing erosion. They also are known for an extremely dense canopy. And that does a couple of things for wildlife. One is that in the cold winter months, it's actually a bit warmer under. If you're in a hemlock stand, you can kind of feel that temperature difference in the winter. So there's some refuge there for mammals and birds. That it's part of the food web, but also provides some shelter. And then as we get into spring, the canopy is so dense that it actually keeps the snowpack on the ground longer than it would anywhere else. So that slow melt of snow actually provides a very cool and oxygen-rich source of water that flows into streams, keeps them cool, and is very important for fish species as well. So there's a lot more that we can say about hemlock trees, but those are just a couple of things that make them special and important for this area and New York State in general. At one point, they were the third most populous tree, and currently they're the fourth most populous tree in the state. So they are under serious threat. And they are facing a forest pest that is formidable. This is hemlock woolly adelgid when it's not wrapped up in the wool that it produces, that it uses as an ovisac to keep itself warm and avoid predation as well. This is an invasive pest, meaning that it is not native to the East Coast. Both Eastern hemlock and Carolina hemlock are actually the only hemlock in the world that don't have an adelgid associate. So this is not something that they're used to dealing with, and it is posing a very serious threat. And that threat is, I think, best described by a few characteristics that HWA has that make it very formidable and challenging to manage. The first is that they reproduce asexually. What that means is that a single adelgid can create a new infestation. Each adelgid can lay between 50 to 100 eggs. So, and that's a conservative estimate. Actually, they raise 2 generations per year and have no native predators here. So all of those things together mean a couple of things. One is that we will likely never eradicate HWA. It's something that we're going to need to learn to live with and manage, which is why some of the long-term strategies that I'll get into are so critical. And 2 is that it's functionally removing hemlock from the landscape. This photograph is not New York State; it's a bit further south, but the HWA is hopefully communicated a very serious threat to our hemlock trees, and not something that's going away unless we take action and actively manage. So just to give a little bit of a lay of the land of where we are and kind of how we got to this point, HWA was first detected in 1951 in Richmond, Virginia, though it likely arrived in the early 1900s. It worked its way up through the Appalachian, and now it's into parts of New York, in Nova Scotia, in Michigan as well, and in Ontario, and currently occupies about 50% of hemlock's native range. So that's kind of where we are now. And before I hand things over to Carl, I for a little while, I just kind of want to set the stage of where we are in New York, because I think it's so relevant to the work that his group does. When we drill down on New York State, you can see that we've really got a lot to deal with here. It's a really complex landscape. We have places in the lower Hudson where HWA has been there for decades, and we have remnant forests that has a little bit of a different situation. We have places like in the Finger Lakes where we have active infestations, and we have trees that are in decline that we're thinking about management options for. And then we have what we like to refer to as the leading edge, places like the Adirondacks, where we're very actively tracking and looking for new infestations. Early detection is critical. It's a complicated landscape here in New York, and we can't be everywhere. And so having strong regional partnerships with engaged groups that want to survey, want to mobilize their communities is critical for us to know what's going on across the state. And so that information really feeds our strategies that I'll get into in just a little while. But I do want to step away for a moment and invite Carl to now kind of share a little bit about what his organization does. And I'll be back to talk more about some of our big picture strategies.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, I'm Carl Weber, and I'm with the ALA Hemlock Hunter Program. And Matt's done a great job in kind of going over with you the importance of the hemlocks in the watershed, and also, the problems that we have with HWA. And so what I'm going to do is I just want to briefly go over with you what our hemlock program is all about and kind of what we do. Oh, wrong way. Okay. So our program was first organized in 2020 with training and guidance provided by Cornell University's New York State Hemlock Initiative team, with our initial hemlock hunts and treatments starting the following year in 2021. Okay, so how do we get started? So to help us get started, Cornell provided us with a prioritization map using satellite imagery of our watershed. You see it on the right-hand side of the screen there. This map identifies the areas where the hemlocks most critical to the watershed are likely located. Now, this map is color-coded, with the color red areas being the areas that are most critical, and then orange, and then so on. So if you look down at the right-hand side of the screen, the right-hand corner, that is like in the Fillmore Glen area, and working north toward Moravia, the south end of the lake, and on up. So as you see, most of these hemlock critical areas in the midway portion of the lake, the southern end. Okay, so once we've identified the areas, now our next step is identifying and contacting the property owners. Now, this is probably one of the most difficult parts of the program. By the use of tax maps and hunting apps, we're able to identify the individual property owners on each particular gully. Now, if you look in the center of this picture, that happens to be the gully off of Seward Point, and I happen to live in this area. And this is actually a photo from one of our hunting apps. And the orange lines that you see represent the property lines. And while if you zoom in on a particular property, it will show you who owns the property, but it doesn't give you any contact info. So that's where the fun begins, is actually trying to contact these property owners without a phone number. So what we end up doing is, first of all, any of the team members maybe knows the property owner, and if they don't, maybe they know a neighbor. And if they know a neighbor, well, then you reach out to them and say, geez, we're trying to get a hold of John Smith. Do you have a phone number, anything we can use to get a hold of him? And well, sometimes they'll give us that information. sometimes they're hesitant. People are leery about giving out other people's information, phone numbers, and we can understand that in today's world. So what happens is they may say, well, we'll have them contact you. So sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And it's even come down in some properties, some cases where some of our team members actually have to start knocking on doors. But once we get to that point where we've made contact with the property owners and explain our program to them, in most cases, they are more than willing to sign up and participate in the program with us. So once they do that, we end up getting together with them to have them sign a 3-party hold harmless agreement, and then we're ready to start hemlock hunting. So that's yours truly on the right-hand side there in my gear. And I just wanted to kind of go over with you, what we do when we go out in the field. So one of the most important things to have are cell phones. We use them for GPS location, photos up close and distance of any HWA that you may find on the trees, property line location. That's very critical so that you don't stray off on somebody else's property, and also for communication. Now, when we go out and do our hemlock hunts, we go out as teams, at least 2 people. And a lot of times you become separated. You may have one of the team members on the top of the gorge. You may have another one on the bottom of the gorge or on the opposite side. And especially once the foliage comes out, it's difficult to keep track of each other. So we always try to encourage each team member to wear bright colors so that we can keep track of one another. You'll also notice that I have a staff in my hand. I have a pole with a hook on the end, and the purpose for that is a lot of these branches that you've got to inspect for HWA, you can't reach. You've got to reach up high with a pole and pull that branch down so that you can look closely at that HWA if it's present on the needles. And HWA is very, very small. You need probably glasses, and even sometimes a handheld magnifying glass would be handy to identify it. It's very difficult to see. In addition, water, snacks, flagging, and insect spray, very important, especially with all the ticks that are out there. So once we get done with our hemlock hunt on a particular parcel, then we meet back at our vehicle and we fill out a survey data sheet, and that's provided by Cornell. And this is just the opening page of it, usually 3 or 4 pages long, but it asks you all sorts of information regarding what you saw out there. First of all, did you find any HWA? If so, was it lightly infested, moderately, or heavily infested? What was the stand characteristics? Were they small trees or mature trees? Did they have a large crown, a lot of branches, or were a lot of the branches dead and there was just a small crown on the top? A lot of different information that you should fill out. And we always fill that out, again, when we're still on site, while all that information is fresh in your mind. And once you get back home, then you can go online and you can download that information and forward it onto Cornell. Okay, so moving forward, once we do a number of properties like that, then the team will get together and we'll review all the results, and we'll determine what site, what the different sites are, what the priority is. I'm jumping ahead here. So yeah, and what we want to do is we want to determine. Let's say we've surveyed a dozen sites. We want to prioritize them for treatment. So we want to decide, all right, which one should we tackle first? So what we do is we'll get with a treatment company and have them go and meet us at the site, and we have them sign a hold harmless agreement and contract with them to do the treatments. Okay, so one other thing I want to discuss before we get into this we also do, we keep detailed records of each site. So, and these records that Owla keeps are not limited to just the property owner, but the initial survey that the team did, the treatment details, including the treatment company, the number of trees treated, and the total cost. And we keep detailed records of all that because it really comes in handy, especially if we come down years later and we have to retreat these trees. Again, we have to check with all these property owners and update information, have them sign new hold harmless agreements for retreatment. Okay, so another portion or another thing that I'd like to touch upon is program funding. Now, this is very important. Our funding comes from grants, organizations, foundations, businesses, and individuals. All donations are very important to us, since many times we are required to provide a matching portion of the grant or the pledge. And I'd like to also give a special thank you to the U.S. Forestry Service, the local Rotaries, including Moravia and Auburn, and the Emerson Foundation for their continued support of our program for many years. Okay, something else I'd like to share with you is these areas, most of them are on private property, and some of these areas are absolutely breathtaking. There's magnificent trees and forest, waterfalls and wildlife, and the natural beauty of some of these areas is absolutely breathtaking. In addition to that, sometimes, expect the unexpected. And yes, that is a pig way over on the right-hand side. And the story behind this pig is we were getting ready to hemlock hunt a particular parcel on a farmer's property. And as we're getting ready to head into the woods, he says, "Hey, boys," he says, "before you go out there," he says, "do me a favor, keep your eyes open for a pig." He says, "I lost one a couple days ago." So I said, "Okay, well, we will. We'll keep our eyes open." So we weren't down in that gully 20 minutes. And one of the team members says, "Look, there's the pig." I said, "Oh, yep, let me take a picture." So I took a picture of the pig. And as you can see, this is a pretty big sow. And I guess this was one of his breeder pigs. So I said, "All right, let me call the farmer up." So I called the farmer up and I says, "Hey, Joe, yeah, guess what? Found your pig." He says, "Is it dead?" I says, "Oh, no, very much alive." He says, "Oh." I says, "All right, I'll be down to get it." So later on, he did. He got the pig out of there. Now, I don't know how he got the pig out of there, if he had a carrot on the end of a stick or something. I have no idea. But he got the pig out of there and everybody was happy. But again, it's really an adventure going down into these gullies and gorges. You never know what you're going to expect to find. So in closing, I just wanted to review with you, our overall purpose of our program. The overall purpose of our program is to buy the New York State Hemlock Initiative at Cornell time to get their predatory insect population established. Enough so that the insecticidal treatments will no longer be necessary in keeping the watershed critical hemlocks forest alive. To date, we've treated approximately 11,000 trees on over 60 private properties and have spent well over $200,000. And with that, I'm going to hand the baton back over to Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really an incredible body of work that Carl and his group has led the charge on surveying and collecting that information that has been utilized to apply for grants and to fund a lot of the amazing work that they've been able to accomplish here. So really impressive stuff. And so I want to come back to build off of that. So we kind of drilled down on this lake and some of the activities happening here, but I want to share more details on kind of the big picture that Carl was alluding to, like what are we working towards and our strategies as it relates to integrated pest management. So I kind of want to walk through a timeline of short and long-term approaches, all of which we have some degree of activity, although some more focused than others, which we'll get into details on. So the first is chemical treatment. It's kind of that tip of the spear, which I'll get into in just a second. But this is that Band-Aid, that short-term option for used in many invasive species management approaches for dealing with the pest in the near term, but it has, of course, there's a cost associated and it's logistically complex, right? So effective, but not something that you can always implement at a landscape level. We have silviculture, which is also used in many forest pest situations where you're, strategically augmenting a forest, doing cuttings and opening things up with research on how that trees will perform and regenerate. There's some interesting research happening at the Pack Forest via SUNY ESF in silviculture for hemlock trees. So we have a lot of optimism in this space, but something that we need to hang tight for the research to come out. But exciting to see that happening. So silviculture is one of the tools in the toolbox. We have classical biological control, which involves going to the native range of the pest and bringing those specialist predators here to get them established to do the management for us over time. Whenever you're doing classical biological control, a great deal of research goes into making sure that it's safe. These are specialist predators. They wouldn't survive without HWA. You test that to see how they'll perform with and without it. And then 2, to make sure that they're going to be effective. And so that's what a lot of our work is focused on. And then finally, there's resistance breeding. Someone earlier mentioned ash. We're involved in a project with the Nature Conservancy called Trees in Peril, where they're looking at 5 threatened trees, actually more than that, but our subset of the project is looking at a few threatened trees across the Northeast from invasive pests and pathogens. So we are involved in monitoring programs where we're actually going out and looking for trees. We call them lingering hemlocks, and there's similar projects, lingering ash, that for these trees that outlast their peers. They've been dealing with the pest or pathogen for many years, and there's a certain level of mortality in the area. Then we get very curious and want to sample and study the trees that are still alive, because they may have some mechanism of genetic resistance, and so we want to understand what that is, propagate, and ultimately reforest. So these are long-term strategies, right, as we kind of go down that line. What we'll be focused on is briefly here chemical treatment I'll talk about, but mostly classical biological control. That's really our bread and butter at the Hemlock Initiative, and where a lot of our operations are focused on. So that's kind of what I'll be talking about for the remainder of my time here. For chemical treatment, there are 2 chemicals that applicators and land managers are working with. There's imidacloprid and dinotephurin. Imidacloprid is slow acting. It can actually take up to a year to become effective, but then it has a much longer efficacy period. So up to 5 years, you can have protection. And there's dinotephurin, which is fast acting, but doesn't have that long protection period. Typically in about a year, you're needing to retreat. So what we see in a lot of cases is folks using a tank mix, so you can get that kind of knockout punch of the dinotephurin, but also the long-term protection of imidacloprid. And there are a number of application methods. There is soil application, and I've got pictures of some of these on this slide. There are pellets that slowly release the treatment over time. What we use predominantly in New York State are very direct methods. It's basil bark application and tree trunk injection. So we're not spraying these chemicals around all over the place. They're going directly to the tree. And so it's done very carefully. And as I think Carl mentioned, a licensed applicator is required to do these kind of treatments. So again, this is the kind of Band-Aid short-term tip of the spear when it comes to treating hemlocks, keeping them on the landscape for these other methods to come into effect. So I want to shift gears and talk about biological control and just introduce the predators that we work with and where they're from. So at Cornell, we work with 3 specialist predators. They're here from the Pacific Northwest. So there's the Laricobius nigrinus beetle, and then there's 2 species of silverflies. There's Leucotraxus argenticollis, as well as Leucotraxus pinniperta. There is another beetle, Laricobius osacensis, that some of our collaborators in Virginia rear, and we do some releases of those beetles in New York State, but they're not, it's the other 3 that I had mentioned from the Pacific Northwest that we rear at Cornell University and are trying to get established on the landscape here in New York State. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide, but a really common question that we get is why do we have 3 predators? And so I want to just communicate a key point to answer that question. And it has to do with the very complex life cycle of hemlock woolly adelgid. The item that I want to draw your attention to is that you see that kind of first fall. I mentioned HWA has 2 generations per year. So that first fall generation has that whole period during winter when it's active, and then a really, really quick spring-summer generation that reproduces in a abnormally quick turnaround time. And our Laricobius nigrinus beetle actually pairs very well with that first generation. But HWA is such a prolific insect when it comes to reproduction and increasing its population quickly over time, that spring-summer generation can pretty much rebound the population, which is why we work with the silver flies as well. These insects, their larvae actually are actively feeding on HWA throughout both of those periods. And our belief is that these specialist predators working in tandem are actually going to be enough to provide that natural check to keep HWA at a level where the hemlocks are infested, but we're not losing those valuable ecological services. So I want to talk about where things stand with the 2 insects, but just briefly, I'll just show a map of all of our releases. So since 2008, we've been releasing the Laricobius beetles, about 90,000 of them. And since 2017, we've been releasing the Leucotraxis silverflies. And as you can see from this map, we're, it's not our intention. We're not able to release it every single place in the state, all across HWA's range. We're concentrating our efforts in kind of inoculating a place with enough insects in hopes of getting establishment so that they can then have a strong population and disperse from there. And so that's kind of what our strategy is. Much of it is focused on the leading edge and in places where HWA first got its foothold in the warmer parts of the state, in the Hudson and Finger Lakes. So let's drill down now on the 2 insects to kind of see where things stand. We'll start with the Laricobius beetle. And as I mentioned, 90,000 beetles since 2008. And what's exciting to share is that these beetles are doing very well here. We have 18 established populations. And as I mentioned, many of them are focused in those earlier parts of, warmer parts of the state where you can see those stars that represent the established populations in the Finger Lakes and Lower Hudson. We are actively surveying in the Adirondacks and other parts of the state to see if there are other locations. It's very possible that they are. And those pink and blue dots represent some of our more recent releases. So a lot focused on that leading edge, the direction that the infestation is moving. So what's exciting about not just seeing establishment is that we're also seeing these populations strong enough that they can now go out and start to move. And so the researcher that I mentioned earlier, Nicholas Stiechler, working with a couple of other students, did a study to confirm just that. We looked at a subset of our established populations and set up buffer zones around them. At certain radiuses. I think we've got, I do have it up there, 8 kilometers, 16 kilometers, and 24 kilometers, and set sticky traps to determine how far off we can detect our predators. And in 39 of the 55 sites they looked at, we detected our predators moving distance up to 24 kilometers away from an established population. So that was really exciting to see, and we want to do, again, like I said, do more of this work to see where else the beetles are established. And so I'll shift gears now to talk about the Leucotraxis silverflies and where things stand with them. So similar to the beetles, we've been releasing strategically in parts of the state since 2017. And as you can imagine, to go out and prove that we have establishment, is difficult work, right? Sometimes it's sticky traps. Sometimes we're using environmental DNA where we're sampling and looking for evidence of a fly, even if we can't capture the fly itself. These are about the size of a fruit fly, very, very small to find them in a forest. And so it's been a challenge to detect our flies when they're out there. So since 2017, we've done other research projects and learned a couple really important things. One, in a controlled environment, we've learned that Leucotraxis argenticollis can overwinter throughout the Eastern Range. We did locations throughout Virginia to New York and proved that. In another study, we confirmed that Leucotraxis argenticollis can complete an entire life cycle in the field. So we kind of replicated that, but out in the field. So this insect can survive. And we've also, as I mentioned, been doing a number of surveying methods to try to find evidence of our fly in New York. We have 2 confirmed populations in Virginia, and we found some evidence that there was wild reproduction in New York. But up until very recently, that was the extent of our search. Some really exciting news is that this past summer, we had done a slight augmentation of our survey period and some of the places that we're looking. And we found our first established population in Bath, New York. And the last time that we had released in that area was in 2020. So, without a doubt, these are flies that are established on the landscape and keeping sustaining their population themselves. And so we're really excited to get back out this spring and summer with that same survey period that we had changed a bit to see where else we may have these flies established. So that is a really exciting development for us to have our first established population of the Leucotraxis silverfly. Okay, so one of the obvious kind of key bottlenecks when it comes to predator rearing is we just can't always source enough, right? We need more predators. This is a recent paper that we put out outlining our methods for rearing all of our specialist predators. We want that information out there in case there are others that are interested in this kind of work. But we can only produce so many. So I want to introduce another strategy that we are employing for getting more predators out across the state, and that is the development of field insectaries. So there are places in the state that we've been releasing for a long period of time and have very, very strong populations. So much so that we can actually go back there and do wild recollection of our insects and do the dispersal for our beetles. So to share just a little bit of history on the location that I'm referring to in the lower Hudson, over the course of about 3 years, we had released just over 2,000 beetles in one particular state park, and we had been monitoring it since. And the exciting news is that we've, in a couple years, have gone back to see if we can do some wild collections. In 2024, I would say, we did one in 2022, which was smaller. In 2024, we had a large collection of over 1,000 beetles in just one day. So that was exciting for us to then, think, okay, this is a very strong population. Where else can we move them across the state? This past fall, we went for a couple of days with some partners from New Hampshire and Vermont and actually collected 12,000 of our beetles over the course of 3 days, which just blew our expectations out of the water. We actually only surveyed a very small part of the park that we've been developing. So we were able to do 3 other releases across New York with these the 6,000 or so that we took with us, and we were also able to share with our partners in New Hampshire and Vermont some beetles to have more of a regional approach there. So that's something that we're very optimistic about in continuing to develop this field insectary, but also looking at others across the state that we may utilize for the Laricobius beetle in particular. Okay, couple of take-home messages on predator rearing. So Laricobius nigrinus, as we've seen, is very well established across the state, and it's dispersing on its own. So we want to keep facilitating that movement with our, with the field insectaries and helping with dispersal. We also now know that Leucotraxis is suitable for New York State, and we have an established population. So we'll continue with our releases. We're planning for our spring release locations right now with our HWA winter mortality survey that's happening. And we want to do more surveying to see where else our insects currently are established. We tend to prioritize releasing on the northern leading edge. That's the direction that the infestation is moving. And that, field insectaries are critical to the future of us being able to meet that need for predators across the state. I want to wrap things up really quickly with some things that private landowners and managers can think about. One is that early detection and rapid response is critical. The surveying work that Carl had went through really informs what we do. All of the forms that we provide groups that we work with feed into IMAP invasives, which is what DEC and the state managers use. All of their invasive species data lives there. So that information is critical. It really does inform our strategy. If we're going to release predator insects, they need something to eat. So it's important to know where the heavy infestations are. And it also gives you time to, if you are aware of an infestation, to respond to it before it gets out of hand if you're considering chemical treatment. We're also currently developing some monitoring protocols that we want to bring partners in on to help us answer that question of where else do we have establishment. So more to come on that front soon. And then last, just to stay informed, like you're all doing here by coming and listening to these talks, arming yourself with knowledge and understanding what's happening in your community and in the ecosystem is critical. So we really thank you for that. That's what I pulled together. So again, thank you to our team and for hosting us here today as well. It's been a pleasure. Happy to answer any questions if there are any. Yeah.
We've all heard about the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
These predators that we're anxious to get deployed, is there a sufficient body of research to know, will they turn on us in 10 years?
It's a good question. And, there's always instances of us kind of being aware of like when biological control goes wrong. And it has, with these predators, years and years and years of research went into, studying them, how they, there's certain tests that you can do to see if they can even survive without HWA. They'll starve. And so, anytime we're introducing something new to an environment, we have to be very careful, research it. But that was, work that had been done for years before we started releasing. And it's been something that we've been doing for, since 2008, not just us, across the entire East with several academic partners. So it's a good question. We're confident that these are safe. They're like the beetles, for example. They're a part of there are actual similar species here, though they don't eat HWA. So anything that would eat a beetle, would like a bird, for example, but that's not any negative impact that we've seen there. But it's a very good question.
I was just curious about the chemical treatment. Does that just affect the HWA, or is there other insects that get killed off by that treatment?
Yeah, whenever you're using a chemical, like these are neonics, there's going to be impacts from insect communities, absolutely. And so, in the research that, has gone into this, we've seen minimal impacts, and also that, so anything else that was feeding on the tree could also, be impacted by the chemical. But kind of similar to the question that came in before, like a great deal of research goes into saying like, okay, if we are inoculating a tree, where do those chemicals go? Do they stay? And it really doesn't travel. And so there is a cost, to doing these things. And that's something that, landowners and managers have to weigh. But so yes, there are impacts of it.
There's a question from Daniel and Susan Kuhn online. Releasing beetles and flies on one's land might migrate to neighbors' properties. Is there any problems with this, or have you seen any?
Yeah, we absolutely have. They're wildlife and they're going to move. And so, for example, there are Laricobius nigrinus beetles in the state of Connecticut, but they've never released any. Like that's what we're going for. And so certainly, the question is valid that, whenever we go on an initiative like this, the research goes into making sure that we're doing something that's safe and that's going to ultimately protect our trees and the environment. But it's a very valid question. They will move. Mm-hmm.
A question in the back. Once trees become infected with HWA, can it be brought back through biological? And I mean, what's the tipping point?
Yeah, they're very resilient. So we've seen trees that have very heavy infestations and look unhealthy that have been treated, and it can take a couple of years, but you'll see new growth. Same for biological control. We are getting to a point where we want to start looking carefully at like what are the improvements of trees. We're working very hard for the establishment right now, but hemlock trees and all trees can be resilient if they're given a chance to breathe, and and the infestation is knocked back. Definitely when your trees are infested, that's why a lot of people turn to chemical treatment to buy them some time, and so certainly they can bounce back.
Do you know if the chemicals that are used to treat these for the HWA, will they actually reside in, for instance, the cones? I know grosbeaks eat the cones. I know there's other there are other species that will eat the different parts of the tree.
Yeah.
Do you know if those chemicals reside, and if they affect? Has any research been done about that?
So that is a good question. That's not where HWA feeds, and so we know that it's more happening in the twigs, and that's where they're getting exposed to it. But so I wouldn't be prepared to answer your question, but I think it's very valid, and I'd love to follow up. I could give you one of my cards if the chemical resides in the cone.
Okay, thank you.
Do the biological control methods, great talk, by the way, and this is excellent work. Do the biological control methods suffer from like predator-prey relationships, like over time, where if they really start to successfully start eating these HWAs, their population gets low enough that they can't sustain themselves? So does that mean that can they eradicate them over time, or do they just really slow them down enough? Do they terminate on their own once they get to a low enough population?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we can see population collapse because of that reason. It's part of why, like, as I mentioned right now, we do a statewide HWA winter mortality assessment where, HWA can be killed by severe cold. Historically, that's kind of been our saving grace, right? But as things get warmer, we're not seeing that all the time. So, we collect that data because we need to release where there's heavy infestations. And it is possible for, things ebb and flow. If you have a dip in HWA population, that there may not be enough for our predators to eat. Like they do need that strong food source. I can't say in detail to how a population collapses, but we've seen that they need the food source. I've never heard anyone that works in this space say that they would eradicate it themselves. It's more, and nor so does that happen in, ranges where these species exist just naturally. There's that balance. So I don't see them eradicating it, but providing that natural check so that they don't ultimately kill the trees.
Yeah. Before you leave the stage, Matt, we've had a raffle going on. I don't know if you can hear me. Maybe I better get over here. A free raffle for a gift to Roast and Toast and a beautiful book. Would you please choose the winner? Yeah.
Pressure.
Put you under pressure.
Trying to find mine.
Nancy Hart. Well, Nancy is an OWLA board member. Certainly deserves this. And I might say too, Carl is an OWLA board member, has gone out into the forests and does water testing and coordinating many fantastic activities that Carl has contributed to OWLA's activities. But also, I'm very interested in the fact, what's the name of the young man, Mr. Strickland, who, in order to spray the hemlock, has to rappel down the side of a hill. And you can imagine the challenge of trying to reach these trees that are needed to hold on to the stream bank or the hillside to prevent the erosion. And there are areas where the trees are devastated. So it's important. So thanks, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed yourself. We really, I would quote from Ann Robson, who's chairing this. She had an article in the paper and she said, let me see, I typed it here. Through research, which of course we've heard a bunch, infrastructure improvements like stream bed remediation or ditch remediation, invasive species control, the gentleman left me, and citizen participation. We create the hope that this particular symposium is based upon, that through activity, we are creating hope. Thank you everyone for being here.